Welcome, everybody, to the Vassals of Kingsgrave. Today, we are going to be discussing a few of the many theories that have come up in discussion of George R. R. Martin's Song of Ice and Fire series. My name is Michal. I go by Inkaz Rain on the forum. And today, I'm here with Nadia.
Hi, everyone.
Duncan.
Hey, everyone. I'm Belkris on the forums.
Peter.
Hey, my forum name is Shellfish.
And for the first time on Vassals of Kingsgrave, we have Dan.
Hi, I go by Witless Chum on the forums.
Awesome. Okay, so now that I know all of your life's ambitions, because I made them write that in the doc, I have no real reason to say that, but I just did. Okay, so I think we're going to start with Nadia, who has a theory about Stannis Baratheon. This is a serious theory, right? Not a crackpot.
Yeah, no, it's not, because I have no basis for this theory at all. I thought of this, and I was like...
Don't say that at the beginning.
No, I'm sure all of you have very well-established theories, well-planned out, discussions, everything, but I don't. I've started liking Stannis recently, and he's had a pretty shitty life, so I want him to have something, a dragon, really, because I like him. That's the entire basis of my theory. Oh, and he has Targaryen. Looked around on the internet, and other people have come up with this theory as well. And again, the basis of this theory is mostly that since Stannis is not just remotely related to the Targaryens, he is a quarter Targaryen, which is quite a lot. So there's a good chance that he could be one of the heads of the dragon.
Which dragon do you think he would ride?
I would say Rhaegal is probably headed towards Jon, so I'm going to say Viserion.
Oh, but he has the worst name.
Yeah.
I can see Viserion and Stannis getting on too, because Viserion was the real pissy one that really went after Quentyn, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was, I think.
But would that sort of clash with Stannis' color scheme? I mean, Viserion is the cream and gold one, isn't he?
Yeah, he is,
like
but
red and yellow and black and...
Yeah, but black and green wouldn't go with him either, right? Rhaegal is what, green and...
No, I guess not, yeah.
Yeah.
Only Theon Greyjoy cares about matching colors, so maybe Loras Tyrell.
Yeah. Stannis is... the problem with that theory would be, and I'm shooting down my own theory now, Stannis is Robert's brother. He's Robert the Usurper's brother. So I don't think that Dany would be very happy if Stannis took one of the dragons.
Yeah. I can't see Stannis getting into a position where he can get a dragon. It just seems so far removed from it at this point. And we've only got 2 books left.
Yeah, but he's the only one. He's this has been pointed out so many times. He's the only king who took the time to answer the Night's Watch's call and go and defeat he was the one who pretty much defeated the wildlings. He's the one who's ready to take on the others. He's gone south now, but
right.
He understands the danger now. And so what is the one thing you need to fight the others? Presumably?
Yeah, that's true. And I guess he's proven his worth. Yeah.
I think Stannis definitely has like the temperament to ride a dragon. He's, I feel like you need that kind of unyielding, at least certainly in reference to the dragon, like you aren't going to give in to whatever they do. But yeah, I agree. Dany's probably the issue, unless there are more dragons somehow.
But you don't exactly need Dany's permission to ride a dragon, right?
Yeah, because a dragon only has one master.
I think Stannis has sort of been painted as this sort of false messiah in multiple visions, really. I mean, I think it was in the House of the Undying where he was called like a pale king without a shadow holding a red sword or something like that. He's sort of like, I don't think he's not Azor Ahai, or he's not really anyone. He's just sort of this dude that's doing
but he is
the right
part
things.
Targaryen, right?
Well, yeah, but I'm not sure
He
if
has the dragon blood.
Yeah, but technically
I think-
every Baratheon is part Targaryen.
Well, yeah, but there are no other Baratheons. Hey, wait. Okay, so could
Edric Storm is
Shireen be
around.
the stone dragon? Okay, this is totally cracked.
Or Gendry. Gendry.
No, Shireen is the stone dragon. That's my theory now.
Oh my god.
Oh no.
My gosh. So everybody, that's why grayscale so bad, because everybody who has grayscale turns into a dragon.
No, but seriously, she is actually a dragon, right? She's part dragon. So, and
Yeah, I
she's
think-
part stone, so she's the stone dragon.
I think it was Dunk's daughter that got married. Not Dunk's, I mean Egg's daughter that he married into the Baratheon line. Like,
Yeah,
think that's
Stannis' grandmother was a Targaryen.
yeah. But yeah, Shireen could work. I mean, I guess that's just from the show, but she was shown to sort of have an interest in Aegon and history in general, and I guess that's in the books as well. She was like a friend to Master Crescent and all that.
And we have Melisandre's vision of somebody's vision of a stone dragon waking beneath Winterfell, right? So Shireen is at the wall. She could maybe, if Stannis wins Winterfell, she could maybe go there and okay, I don't know where I'm going.
And in The Princess and the Queen, there was that other little girl from Dragonstone who like rode the dragon and basically killed Sunfire.
So Shireen could be headed towards that fate as well.
Well, that's right. We do see a possible dragon vision at the end of Book 2 when Summer is skulking around the ruins of Winterfell, and he sees after Ramsay sacked it, and he sees a huge serpent rise, and its roar is a river of flame. And some people have suggested that maybe a dragon had been hibernating or encased in stone beneath Winterfell, and it had been released when Winterfell was destroyed. So you could interpret that as like a dragon being woken from stone.
Yeah, I think somebody else had a vision of a stone dragon as well. I think it was Melisandre.
She's always hopping on about this.
Yeah. Anyway, so there's a chance. So instead of Stannis, I am now converting this to Shireen is one of the three heads of the dragon.
Oh.
Okay, so again, no basis for this theory at all. This is totally crackpot.
You know what? Dayne swings that way, right? So
Hey, Shireen is just a little
She's like 11 or
She's
something.
wanted.
that's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
But Dany isn't exactly old herself, so.
Well, she likes
Right.
sleeping with Missandei, yeah.
It happens to be Shireen is like one of my like stealth favorite characters. It's like one of those people in the background who I think is totally awesome.
Yeah. We haven't seen that much of Shireen, right? We've only seen her playing once or twice with Edric Storm.
Yeah, but she's been very kind, and like, I mean, the fact that she's like really friends with Edric Storm is like pretty telling too. And like Maester Crescent, right? He was like totally like devastated that he couldn't help her grayscale, and to me that like it kind of seemed like she was a real bright spot in his life. And yeah, whatever. I think she can be with Satin or whatever. I don't know. Though if she got together with Edric Storm, then she'd really be a oh no, he's Robert's, right? So she'd be like a double.
But Edric is also part Targaryen, right?
Right.
And Gendry and all of and even Mia Stone is. So they're all dragon seed. So one of them could take. There are a lot of claimants for the dragon now that I think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm starting to think after reading Princess and the Queen, I'm starting to think that we're going to see maybe more than 3 dragons when when everything hits the fan or hits the wall or whatever.
So this could if Stannis gets a dragon, right? It could also lead to a second dance of dragons, right?
Mm-hmm.
Since they'd be on opposite sides, Stannis and Dany.
Or that's true, yeah.
Sort of popular theory that if Dany comes to Westeros, that Stannis would sort of bend the knee because he sort of was very hesitant to join the rebellion on Robert's side, that he would sort of recognize her as the rightful heir to the Iron Throne, sort of.
No, I don't think
Would
so.
he? I mean, the Targaryens claimed the throne by conquest, right? And so
Yeah.
did Robert. His
Yeah, I
claim
think
is
that's
as
sort of-
valid as the Targaryens.
I think
I
Stannis
say
would have
that
seen it as
that's a pretty popular theory, but I think it's might be a little too neat for these books. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no way
This
Stannis
idea
is
that like
better.
Stannis is such a good guy and like so I mean he's pretty decent as far as they go in the series, but like that he's so devoted to the cause of right that like the second he hears that there's a better claimant, he'll just abandon what he's devoted like 6 years of his life to, which is involved like killing his brother, starting a new religion, you know, conquering half of the North. You know, I could see Stannis abdicating in favor of Dany or just giving up his claim, but I don't think it's as much of a given as some people think it is.
Yeah, no, I don't think so either. I mean, he's not bending the knee.
Yeah, I don't think Stannis has that in him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
breaks. He doesn't bend.
Well, I think that from the position of him being king, I think he probably would stick to his guns in the sense that he would see the Baratheons having supplanted the Targaryens. Like it was a lawful conquest, and they've deposed them lawfully. So he wouldn't necessarily bend the knee to someone his brother defeated. But the other side is
But is deposing a king ever lawful?
well, I guess if you're
I
the
don't
king,
think it's a
if you're the king,
justification.
anything you write is lawful. So it's lawful under Robert's rule. But I think on the other side of it is the sort of Azor Ahai prophecy. Like I think one of the things you see, especially after Blackwater, is this idea that he doesn't necessarily want to pursue this role for the Iron Throne anymore, but he has to because he's been told by Melisandre that he's the promised one. He's the one who's going to save the world. But if he sees Daenerys and maybe recognizes she probably has a greater claim to that idea of the Azor Ahai prophecy, the fact that she's actually woken real dragons out of petrified eggs and fulfills all of its other criteria that he could only ever dream of. Maybe that would be the thing that clinched it and says, no, I'm staring in the presence of Azor Ahai. I should kneel.
Yeah, I don't know if he believes in Azor Ahai. I mean, this is a big long debate about how much does Stannis actually believe in R'hllor. But
Maybe,
I'm not convinced. Like I mean, as everyone said, like the sword has no heat. It's a glamour. He has to be aware of a certain extent of it. I do think he's not as devoted to the idea of being Azor Ahai as he is to being king of the Seven Kingdoms. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see what he does.
Mm.
So the new theory is any Baratheon could get a dragon.
if you're, oh my gosh, maybe Arya, because Arya is turning like to stone emotionally, so she's gonna be and be the stone dragon.
I reckon the
Yeah,
three heads will be Dany, Jon, and Tyrion. I think, but we might get that. That might be another theory from one of you guys. The Tyrion is secret Targaryen.
I don't want Tyrion to actually ride a dragon. I want him to, still look on them with awe, and I don't want him to be a Targaryen either. So.
Yeah, but he is.
No, don't say that.
I think the evidence
is, but don't say
is a
that.
lot, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
but I hate it. I don't want him to be a Targaryen.
Yeah, I want the Tyrion, you're really Tywin's son thing from Jenna Lannister to be true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. That's probably my whole issue with it. They have such. Tywin and Tyrion's relationship is so complicated, and then just to say, he wasn't even his son, then that's, that kind of destroys the whole build-up we've had.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's probably true, but I don't want to believe it either, because it just destroys Tyrion's sort of relations with Tywin. Dany, Jon, and Tyrion really are the three main protagonists of the series, so I could definitely see that.
And I mean, if you think about it, like, is the head of the dragon / one of Dany's husbands really not going to be related to her? Like, of course they are. They're both going to be related to her, and it's going to be sick and weird. But we're going to follow it anyway.
Yeah.
I can't lie. Part of me is amused by the idea of teeny tiny Tyrion riding a huge
I guess it would fit nicely with Tyrion riding Viserion, because he's got the goat for the Lannister, and Jon with Rhaegal, who's Rhaegon or whatever its dragon's name is, because that's his dad or something.
But why would anyone want Viserion?
Cream and green is really pretty. That's nice.
No, cream and gold. But no, that's not the point. His name is just... Yeah. Right. Viserion was the beggar king. He didn't even have an awesome name.
Card
Well,
King.
there was all the other Viserys in the past, though. There's basically been one really crappy one, but there were some good ones before.
But he's been named for the crappy Viserion.
Well, which Viserys were like good kings? I mean, there was the one who poisoned Baelor the Blessed, his nephew,
Well,
but
maybe poisoned. He was blamed for it, but there was no evidence.
oh come on, he did it.
Yeah, well, he was probably in the right there too. I mean, Baelor the Blessed was pretty mad, and
Every rumor is true and every legend is true.
But seriously, no Viserion. I wouldn't want that dragon.
If you think about it, it's actually kind of curious that Dany did name him Viserion because, like, she's in a very weird emotional place at that point. I feel like she was just out of names. Like, you know, had, like...
Her
No, but
relationship.
she named one for her husband and then two for her brothers. That's common sense.
Yeah, I think her relationship with Viserys is interesting because he did treat her horribly, but at the same time he protected her basically her whole life, and it was only in the last couple of years that he became really horrible to her. Like she remembers fond times with him, even if what we see of him is pretty horrible.
That's true.
Yeah, I think that's they're sort of the three most important men in her life, even though she never met Rhaegar. But I guess before she names her dragons, she doesn't really have any visions of Rhaegar, does he? I mean,
I think he was definitely named after Rhaego. It was like Rhaego and Rhaegar.
yeah, but
She did have visions of Rhaegar, right? But that was after. That was
House
after
of the Undying and before Astapor. But I mean, did she have before naming the dragons then?
But she'd heard a lot of stories about him from Viserion, right? From Viserys.
Did she have visions when
Probably
she was in
Iron
labor?
Witch.
I couldn't remember.
No, she was pretty much unconscious during
I thought-
labor.
Okay, I thought
No,
she
no,
saw stuff.
I think you're right, Duncan. I mean, she saw like
She had sort of visions when Azul was in the tent doing all her magic stuff.
Yeah.
I think
After she didn't remember any part of her labor.
No, I think she did have visions like what was her son's name, Rhaegar, turning to ash or something like that. Pretty sure.
I don't remember.
Hang on.
The other thing about the naming too is I think doesn't she say something like he's Viserys as he should have been or something like that after she names him?
Yeah, she does. I think so.
And if he's a girl, I mean, you know, right? There has to be one female dragon at least.
Yeah.
That's really confusing. They're supposed to be like asexual or monogendered or something, but then in
That's what I said before. And in The Prince and the Queen, they all very clearly had one sex.
Yeah, but maybe they were sort of named or like genders attributed to them by their owners or something, because it is like a second-hand account for Prince and the Queen written down by a maester.
Yeah, that could be.
Maybe.
All right. So have we exhausted Stannis?
Exhausted the story.
And then some.
Poor Stannis.
All right. So next up is Duncan.
Okay. So I think I've written way too much, so I'm just going to read, and you guys feel free to interrupt me whenever you want with like comments or questions.
To the Batmobile. Let's go.
Okay, so this is called the Arya is Batman theory, and rather than addressing like a specific mystery in the story, it's more general theory about how Arya Stark's character arc might align with Bruce Wayne in the Batman comics. So I'm going to read an extract from a Batman Origins comic, but I'm going to replace the name Bruce Wayne with Arya Stark, and you see if you can tell the difference. And I think these panels are from year 1, but I could be wrong. Anyway, so the panel reads, Arya Stark learned the power of fear as a girl, watching in frozen horror as her parents, two of Westeros' leading citizens, were brutally murdered. Arya swore a solemn oath to avenge their deaths. Relying less upon her family's name than on her iron will, Arya traveled the globe, gradually training her mind and body to the peak of human perfection while studying under the best warriors, thieves, and fighters the world has to offer. Now, if anyone has heard Martin talking in interviews or read any of his autobiographical writing in Dream Songs, you learn pretty quickly that he credits comic books with stoking his imagination as a child, to the point where he would write his own comic books to sell to friends and then later submit them to fanzines to be published. Now, while the influence of like fantasy writers like Tolkien and Jack Vance is pretty evident in his sort of contemporary work, I would argue that there's also distinct parallels between the character arc of Arya Stark and DC Comics' Bruce Wayne, which could illuminate some of her fate in the future books. So, as mentioned, the fact that she witnesses both her parents die, albeit on separate occasions, is one such parallel, but another is that in her quest for vengeance, Arya eventually finds herself at the headquarters of the Faceless Men, who I think we could interpret as Martin's version of the League of Assassins, or as they're called in the movie Batman Begins, the League of Shadows. So like the League of Shadows, the Faceless Men are an order of highly skilled, shape-shifting ninjas who act as a check against all the great powers of the world, most notably Valeria. So here's another quote. In Batman Begins, Ra's al Ghul describes the guild thusly: Gotham's time has come. Like Constantinople or Rome before it, the city has become a breeding ground for suffering and injustice. It is beyond saving and must be allowed to die. This is the most important function of the League of Shadows. It is one we have performed for centuries. Gotham must be destroyed. And I think the reoccurring example of this kind of civilizational decadence we hear in A Song of Ice and Fire is, of course, the Valyrian freehold, which at one point was threatening to enslave the entire continent of Essos. And yet, 400 years ago, without warning or reason or explanation, Valyria was suddenly destroyed in an event ominously referred to as the Doom. We know that Braavos was always opposed to the city, having been founded by refugees and escaped slaves fleeing the Valyrian expansion. However, the kindly man explains to Arya that it was the first Faceless Men who gave the gift of death to the most desperate slaves toiling in the Valyrian mines, and then later to their masters as well, leading many fans to speculate that the guild was somehow involved in the Doom. But it has... Oh, sorry.
Talk about that a little bit. I mean, do you think the Faceless Men caused the like volcanic eruptions that caused the Doom or whatever? Like, did they plant a bomb in like a vent or something?
Yes, it's not clear. It seems to be, some people describe it as like maybe dragons attacking or volcanic eruptions from the earth. But the guy specifically says to Arya, we also gave the gift of death to their masters.
Well, if you look at the map of Valyria, I think it's sort of fallen into the sea, so I guess dragons couldn't just melt the land as well. So I guess pretty sure it's like a sort of
But the dragons died in the Doom as well.
I think it was always an
island
city, yeah.
In the peninsula, I thought.
Yeah. But I think it's the fact that it's covered in this thick smoke. It could either be dragons or volcanic eruptions.
I mean, I like the idea that it's a volcanic eruption, but at the same time, I like the idea that, like, we're all going like, oh, yeah, we can see through that magic. It's a volcanic eruption. And then George is like, ha, 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 but...
There's also a bit of a parallel with Hardhome, which is described as a similarly cataclysmic event where it's just this white flash of flame.
Yeah, but how, like, sophisticated of a city could Hardhome have been? I mean, it's the first man, they basically don't have much.
Of course, yeah. Well, I mean, but that might more allude to either an eruption or, like the fireworms that Melisandre describes seeing beyond the wall.
So did you have like a theory that it was like a meteor or something like? I think I remember from one of the Dance episodes or something.
Or a meteor, yeah, that's true. But I guess from the Faceless Men's position, maybe if they use sorcery or something to control the dragons. I mean, we saw the alchemist trying to use some kind of sorcery to control the dragons in Old Town or kill them or something.
Okay, well, I've got no more about Valyria, but so...
Okay, I've got a little bit more if you want me to keep going. So it's been over 400 years since Valyria fell, and by comparison, the remaining free cities are little more than a collection of bickering schoolchildren. So I would argue that King's Landing, the capital of the Seven Kingdoms, has become the most recent, quote, breeding ground for suffering and corruption to catch the Faceless Men's eyes. And like Valyria before it, King's Landing has begun to poison the rest of the world, reducing Westeros to a perpetual war zone, forcing hundreds of refugees across the narrow sea, and most egregious of all, refusing to repay their debts to the Iron Throne. And so the Faceless Men must step in to restore the balance and tear it down. And given the identical way he employs children spies, one could even speculate that Varys is their man on the inside. and that they are in fact orchestrating the reinstatement of the Targaryen dynasty. And this would seem at odds with their anti-dragon mission statement, but it could be counteracted by Daenerys' campaign to free slaves. Regardless, the Faceless Men probably already have a plan in motion to remove their dragons from the equation, as I said, in the form of the Alchemist. This doesn't necessarily mean they will be against the Targaryen dynasty, especially if it restored peace and stability to the land west of the Narrow Sea. And the other possibility is that their man is Littlefinger, who has the Titan of Braavos as his sigil. But again, this is all pure speculation. Regardless, at this point in the story, Arya is still being trained by the Faceless Men. Specifically, she is learning the art of theatricality and deception to ensnare her targets. It's difficult to say what Arya's eventual fate might be, but if she follows Bruce Wayne's character arc, there will be a point when the Faceless Men will ask her to do something that is against her morals or something that conflicts with her Stark identity, which she does continue to nourish, for example, when she kills Darion. And at this point, she may abandon the Faceless Men and become a free agent. And I think like Bruce Wayne or like Sandor Clegane, whom she saw consumed by her hatred of his brother, Arya's journey will be about coming to terms with her family's murders rather than running away from it, and choosing to pursue justice, like her father, rather than vengeance.
Like her mother.
That's right, yeah. And the other, that's a good parallel. And the other question, I guess, to consider is what Arya's fate will be in the next couple of books, whether she'll stay with the Faceless Men or whether she'll move outside them. So my sort of theory was that she'll be contracted to assassinate an important character in the series. But I mean, what are you guys' thoughts on Arya's fate or Arya's destiny in the next couple of books?
I think it definitely has some. Oh, go ahead, Nadia.
No, I was just saying I just wanted to get out of there.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, I thought that she definitely has some parallels to Batman and stuff like that, but I'm not really a fan of the more like bigger overarching Faceless Man conspiracies that sort of they're behind everything and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Since I don't know almost anything about Batman other than like Batman or whatever, does Batman work for the League of Shadows?
Well, I'm sort of going off the Christopher Nolan movies, but yeah, he does, like, after he sees his parents get murdered, he becomes really messed up, and he sort of eventually just escapes Gotham and just starts wandering the world, mixing it up with other criminals. And he eventually finds himself in the League of Shadows, which is this order of ninjas, as I said, who sort of see themselves as opponents of criminality and corruption. And he gets trained by them, and eventually they ask him to go to Gotham and basically tear it down so it can be, because it's basically poisoning the rest of the world. And he says, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to save Gotham. So the people who trained him suddenly become his enemies.
She does have a lot of similarities to Batman. When you read that Bruce Wayne's life history, it does match Arya in a lot of ways. And I'm really hoping that, the justice part comes back really soon to her. Because she spent a lot of time away from Westeros, from civilization, as she knew it before. And it's time for her to come back, really.
Well, I have to say, like, I'm torn on. I mean, obviously, I want Arya to get out of the Faceless Men, like from a character perspective. Something I've been like debating with myself for a long time is whether that would be ethically right. I mean, obviously, like, they're a guild of assassins. I don't know what ethics are worth, but Arya has like repeatedly thrown her lot in with them, and they've given her multiple chances to leave. If she doesn't want to keep going forward. And yet she continues to take what she wants from them without really following their rules. Like, she won't give up Arya Stark. She hides Needle. She totally cheats using the cats to see when she's supposed to be blind. And I have some problems with Arya anyway, but I think that, like, the idea that she could just, like, waltz off and be like, okay, now I'm awesome assassin girl, and, you guys can't do anything to me, and that there won't be any consequences to that seems like a leap to me.
It doesn't seem like the Faceless Men would be too okay with that, and they're pretty powerful as far as being able to hunt down a little girl and either drag her back or eliminate her.
Yeah.
Well, it might simply be the case that they don't want to tell her what to do because they'll know that'll immediately she's very rebellious. She doesn't want to be told what to do. So the way they've sort of entranced her into this guild is far more subtle, I guess. Like, it seems like she can leave anytime she wants, but we don't know if that's the case.
I mean, it's obviously anything's possible, but I don't know. I just the number of times that she's told, like, we'll set you up in this kind of life, we'll set you up in that kind of life, we'll help you, whatever. And just the fact that they've not only taken her in, but they've fed her, they've clothed her, they've barely asked her to do anything. Like, it seems like a very strange equation to me. I guess part of the question is whether she's actually fooling the Faceless Men or not. They might be onto her even if she can't tell that they are.
Well, I would argue she has been providing a service for him. I mean, she's essentially acting like one of Varys' little birds. She's going out every day and finding out all this information and then bringing it back to the kindly man, like Varys' little birds does. And she has performed hits for them as well. So I don't think she's just freeloading.
That's only one hit.
It's one hit, and it was part of her. It was like, okay, well, you kind of earned the right to do this.
Yeah, I don't think the 3 things she has to tell every day, that sort of thing is really spying. I think that's just sort of part of her training. I mean, I'm pretty sure that the Faceless Men know all that stuff already, even before she does that stuff to them.
Okay, I saw it more as a little bird thing. Like, she was being a little spy.
The little birds, they're sort of they spy on the nobles in the tunnels of the Red Keep. And Arya just sort of goes to the Happy Port and, like, reports that this, like, Jon is visiting this whore today or something like that. I mean, it's not really very, like, valuable information.
I think it's all valuable. Like, I think, especially in Book 2, where you see the riots, like, I think Varys probably had information being fed to him about the state of the small folk at that point.
Yeah, sort of get the pulse of the city, but I think there are easier ways to do that.
Yeah, I guess what the nobles are doing is probably more valuable in the long run.
So you're trying to find Tariq Lannister?
Right?
Yeah, that's all right.
Yeah, but definitely I think Arya could be a bad man because she sort of first comes into her own in Harrenhal, and one of the houses that held Harrenhal was House Wenth, and their sigil is a black bat on yellow field.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That's funny.
There's also another quote I found from Ra's al Ghul, who's the leader of the Faceless Men, and he says something which I think kind of applies to Arya as well. And he's talking to Bruce, and he says, "I know the rage that drives you, that impossible anger strangling the grief, until the memory of your loved ones is just poison in your veins. And one day you catch yourself wishing the person you loved had never existed, so you would be spared your pain." And I think, like Jon, one of the ways she deals with Arya, and like Sansa as well, is by kind of disconnecting herself from her Stark identity. She just becomes kind of like a blank canvas that the Faceless Men can just kind of enact any identity or role onto. But she does sort of still nourish this memory of Jon, who she knows, or she sees as the last living member of her pack, with the sword that he gifted her at Winterfell. She hides it somewhere.
So in terms of being, instructed to assassinate somebody, which I've heard people say before, but I'm curious with Arya what that would be, because she, like we saw in the meeting with the Faceless Men, all of them going like, "I cannot kill this man, I know this man," So, I mean, would it be like a reverse Batman? Like, would she be like assigned to kill Sansa or something and totally go and do it, and then along the way somehow get turned around, like lie that she knew her? And
Well, I had a couple of thoughts. One of them, yeah, as you say, was not Sansa, but Robert Arryn. Because I think if there's one person with enough money to hire the Faceless Man, it's Littlefinger. And after the wedding of Harold Harding and Elaine Stone, only the Lord of the Eyrie would prevent him from like complete domination of the Vale.
But do you really need an assassin?
Yeah,
Robert Arryn.
Yeah,
And a very
Littlefinger's a businessman. That's not a good investment.
I think it's the fact that like he can't be seen to have done it. Like, it'd be too obvious if he was in the same room when it happened. But maybe it's too much money for just such an easy task.
He doesn't have to be. He's already poisoning Robert Arryn, right?
I guess I just like the idea of because Elaine Stone and because Arya and Sansa are under assumed identities, the Faceless Men wouldn't know that they knew each other because they're both under aliases, so they wouldn't know each other until they got into the same room together and they would recognize each other.
But
Maybe it's more romantic than practical.
So what if all of the Vale Lords pool their money together to hire a faceless man to assassinate Littlefinger?
I was
That
just
could
thinking
work.
the same thing.
Yeah, me
Yeah.
too. Although I thought that Varys might sort of hire the Faceless Man for that, but yeah, I guess.
Watch, there's
Wait.
gonna be like 6 faceless men in his bedroom. The ravens all got lost.
Yeah, but if you want to put Arya in the same room with Sansa, I guess they could send her after Littlefinger or something. But although she did meet him in the turning of the hand, so
Yeah, I mean that's interesting. I could see. I mean, I guess we don't really know like the extent to what like to which you have to know a person. Like she's never talked to Littlefinger. I don't know if she's aware of his. He's not on her list, is he?
No.
yeah,
He's not. So
No,
she isn't
no,
even
I don't-
aware of the extent of his involvement in her horrible life, and ironically, the horrible life that her alter ego has. Right, because Jane Poole was imprisoned in one of Littlefinger's brothels.
Yeah.
So,
Oh God.
Sorry. So
And sorry, another possibility could be Daenerys, because the Faceless Men are kind of opposed to the, one, dragons, but also two, this kind of revived Valyrian empire that Dany might be cultivating. And we know that Jaqen is in Old Town, possibly trying to find a dragon slaying manual. So another possibility is that when he comes back, he and Arya can go to Meereen and basically take out Dany and her dragons in one stroke. And the reason this is kind of a possibility is because Dany is known to have a weakness for children, and she sees them as like these really fragile things to be protected. There's tons of them hanging around her court, and the thought of killing her, even as hostages, really distresses her. So it could be a weakness that the Faceless Men sees on.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because if assuming Dany is going to win the battle to begin the next book, then Volantis and people like that are going to be like, oh shit, So they but they would still be rich enough to hire the Faceless Men potentially.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes it also actually it makes sense to me that, well, I guess Bravos is closer to Westeros than Meereen is, so then this doesn't really make sense. But it would be weird for them to send her to Westeros. I feel like the kindly man knows her well enough that sending not Arya Stark or sending no one back to Westeros is not a smart idea. So sending her further east would actually make sense. And I'd like Dany and Arya to meet. That would be... I mean, I wanted Dany and Tyrion to meet, so, whatever. It won't happen. But we'll see.
And it might be cool to see Jaqen and Arya again. I mean, I thought, there's a Faceless Man mentioned at the end of her last chapter, Izambaro or something. And I thought that might actually be Jaqen's, like, real Faceless Man name. That's who her trainer's going to be once he's finished his mission in Old Town. The third possibility I thought was Tommen Baratheon, and the main clue for this is at the end of A Dance with the Dragon when Tommen sees a black cat outside of his window, which suggests both the sorry, my phone's gone off. Which suggests both the Death Omen and like Princess Rhaenyra's grisly fate, and also Arya's called the Cat of the Canals.
yeah, but that cat is Bloodraven, isn't it?
Yeah, that was the theory on one of the previous VOKs that I
thought it
listened
was
to anyways.
I thought it was the princess. Yeah.
No,
No,
I'm
that
pretty
was
sure it's
that was
Bloodraven.
Bloodraven's. That was Bloodraven's window to King's Landing.
Bloodraven can do cats, too.
Well, Arya can, so I guess Bloodraven is like a 50 level higher walk than Arya, so I'm pretty sure he can do cats. I mean, it would make sense that he would be like keeping an eye on his sort of family in the Targaryens, and there's also that one passage that I'm not sure who remembers, was it Cersei or someone, that the cat once sort of like swiped a piece of meat from Tywin's hand, and
Yeah, and Robert laughed.
Well, as a fan of cats, I kind of like the idea that this is just this badass cat, making his life in King's Landing after his princess was murdered.
Yeah, either way, it's very cool.
Yeah. That was one of the few things I actually did pick up on. After a while, I picked up that cat was Princess Rhaenys cat. I was like, yay, I'm so smart.
Balerion.
Yeah, that was his name, Balerion.
He's the stone dragon. It's in King's Landing. Awesome.
That's pretty much everything I had. The only other connection I could think of was the Lazarus Pit, which is like this sort of fountain of eternal youth, and there's a couple of characters in the House of Black and White that seem to have eternal youth, but that's about it.
Well, I think the wave really has eternal youth. It's more of
Yeah.
a curse, really.
But also the kindly man seems to be this decrepit old skeleton, but he can suddenly become younger again.
Yeah, but I guess that's just the Faceless Men magic in itself.
Sure, yeah.
They can change. I sort of thought about, in your initial sort of speech about it, was that West King's Landing would be this, like, the den of scum and villainy, or the nest of sort of debauchery and all that. I mean,
Yeah.
I think the Free Cities and the Slavers' Bay in particular are much worse than Westeros. So
I just feel like you're probably right, but this free cities have nowhere near as much power as King's Landing. Like, they're always just squabbling amongst themselves, whereas King's Landing is the capital of the Seven Kingdoms. It basically runs Westeros, and that is inevitably going to spread outwards. Especially, and maybe that was okay when the Targaryens were running things because they kept a relatively stable realm, but since Robert took power, that all kind of destabilized, and then once Robert died, it all fell apart and just erupted into this really vicious war all across an entire continent. So I can't imagine the Faceless Men being okay with that if they weren't okay with Valyria.
But the thing is, like, I mean, there are a few places in this world that don't have slavery, but it doesn't seem like a lot, and Westeros is like this huge area that, for all of its multiple and very piquant faults, does not allow slavery at all. And I feel like for the Faceless Men to be like, oh yeah, we're just going to take this place down, would be a little bit counter to their one modus operandi that we are aware of.
Yeah, you're totally right. And that's also a mark against them attacking Daenerys, considering she's on this quest to free all the slaves in Slaver Bay.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to speculate. There's a lot of conflicting things.
Yeah,
but I think there might be something to what you said, that they might be going after the debt that they have to the Iron Bank, because, I mean, they necessarily aren't quite as righteous as the League of Shadows or League of Assassins is in Batman, because this is Martin after all, and things are a bit more nuanced.
Although I have always gotten the impression, like, all the Braavosi characters we've met, I've like really liked, like especially that banker that goes up to the wall. They're all pretty cool, really confident guys, as opposed to all the other people in the Free Cities who I just hate.
Yeah, but they're still like people, and they have needs and sort of desires and greed and all that. So I can't imagine that they would be like these sort of arbiters of justice or something.
That's true, but I just get the sense that Martin likes Braavos the same way he likes kind of the wildlings. The way he describes them is so much more complimentary, especially what they are. Like, they're considered the most powerful people, but they're also trying to free slaves. They're really competent bankers. They're really confident administrators. The Sea Lord frees all those wildling slaves on the docks, whereas you see in Pentos that Illyrio, he doesn't really care. He's happy to have slaves, even if he doesn't call them slaves. He doesn't really care. So they just seem like a cooler place to live than the rest of the free cities.
Yeah, but I mean, the Iron Bank is pretty brutal. You know, I mean, like,
are they?
Yeah, didn't like, wasn't there this whole speech about how, like, you know, if you are in debt to a normal person, you ignore that debt or whatever. Like, a king would ignore that debt. If a prince was in debt to the Iron Bank, the prince would no longer be a prince and would sell literally everything he had. I don't know. I'm totally paraphrasing, but I remember something.
I don't think that's brutal. I think if you give, like, that just demonstrates their power. It's not like they're killing. It's not like they're killing the people. It's just like they're so powerful that they can rob him of all of his kind of power structures and economic benefits. It's almost like a check against the powerful.
I feel like the manifestation of that is brutal, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, how they accomplish that, though, is they give your enemy money to buy cell swords, which he then uses to make war on you and, burn all your peasants' houses. So it's pretty brutal.
Yeah, that's what the wiki says. When princes or kings default on their debts or are foolish enough not to honor their agreements with the Iron Bank, the Iron Bank supports new princes and kings to appear. Hence, the guy going to Stannis.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we've seen them do.
Mm.
Yeah, okay. I guess we haven't.
There might be also something to the fact that I'm basically usually against the sort of theory that every Braavosi is sort of somehow connected to the Faceless Man, but I think there might be some like connection there, that the people who lend money from the Iron Bank sort of have this fear of the Faceless Man as well, sort of enforcing the Iron Bank's rights, I guess.
Yeah.
I guess if there's one organization could afford the Faceless Men, that would be them.
Yeah, I feel like they have to have a working relationship. That's got to be a thing.
Yeah. Especially the way the city was founded as this kind of secret city. I think there would have had to be a lot more cooperation between the original founders.
Yeah. Was that where the elephants and the tigers were? Or...
No, that was Volantis, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Volantis.
Shows that I remember almost nothing from Dance with Dragons. Okay, so I guess one more question for you, Duncan. In terms of personality, like it kind of seems like, from what I know of Bruce Wayne and Arya, they kind of are going on opposite trajectories. Like Arya is getting colder and colder and colder, and Bruce Wayne kind of becomes more righteous.
Well, no, I think Arya is at the part where Bruce was at his darkest, when he was basically just on this walkabout among all the criminal fraternities of the world, and eventually finds himself in this League of Assassins and thinks he's doing something righteous by learning how to kill, but then realizes what they really are. Like, I think at some point there's going to be a far darker. I mean, they're pretty dark even at the moment, but Arya is going to see something a lot darker in the Faceless Men, because it's not really clear what their role is. It's all very vague about who gets to be killed, who deserves the gift of death, and how they decide that according to their many-faced god. But I think Arya is at her darkest place, and she's going to come to some... I mean, this is pure speculation, but I think she's going to come to some realization and either confront the Faceless Men or abandon them, or... I mean, for all we know, this is Martin. She could just be an assassin for the rest of the series, and we hardly ever see her again. But who knows? We'll see, I guess. But I guess it's just an innate desire in me to see a bit of the old Arya return, maybe as she sort of matures into adulthood, sort of trying to. I guess her struggle is to try and put away that lust for vengeance. And if we're following the Bruce Wayne analogy, which is admittedly not the strongest thing in the world, but the movement would be towards seeking justice rather than vengeance. And as you say, I love that comparison between the mother and the father. The mother seeks vengeance, the father seeks justice.
Yeah, I think it's cool. Well, he has some, like, there's, it sounds ridiculous, but then there's like just enough there to make you go like, really.
Yeah, well, this episode's called Crackpot Theories. So I tried to be as crackpot as possible.
Hey, my theory is not a crackpot theory. It's been relegated to that drawer by the fandom at large. But...
We'll see.
Okay, does anybody else have anything to say about Duncan's theory? We're good? I feel like a teacher? Okay. It's okay, I am a teacher. All right, so I guess I will continue with my true Brandon Ashara theory of truth. Which is basically that instead of Ned and Ashara hooking up at the tourney of Harrenhal, as we've sort of been led to believe through the books up until Dance with Dragons, it was actually Brandon Stark who probably slept with Ashara at Harrenhal. Possibly with children resulting from that, or possibly not. So the proof that I have for this basically starts with an opening from Barristan Selmy, which is in Dance with Dragons. He does a lot of thinking, and one of the things he thinks about is the tourney at Harrenhal, and how he had eyes for only Ashara Dayne, and she was the most beautiful person ever. And what he says is, he didn't tell her how he felt, but no good came from silence either. If I had unhorsed Rhaegar and crowned Ashara queen of love and beauty, might she have looked to me instead of Stark? So that, kind of fits in with Ned, because his last name is Stark also. But also in Dance with Dragons, we get our first-hand discussion, really, of Brandon from, what's her name, Lady Dustin, who is talking to Theon, and she tells us maybe something that I had sort of suspected already, but that took a lot of people by surprise, which is that Brandon was maybe not the nicest guy. She says, my father had great ambitions for House Ryswell. He would have served up my maidenhead to any Stark who happened by, but there was no need. Brandon was never shy about taking what he wanted. I am old now, a dried-up thing, too long a widow, but I still remember the look of my maiden's blood on his cock the night he claimed me. So they clearly had a relationship. She claims that Brandon didn't want to marry Catelyn. Whether or not that's true, we don't know. He did basically kill Littlefinger to marry Catelyn. And that's also interesting that that Lady Dustin says that, you know, Brandon was never shy taking anything that he wanted, because Ned also says something like that. Something about, I don't have the exact quote, but something about how, you know, everything was always for Brandon. So that's basically the basis of my theory. I have some more kind of proof, but do any of you guys have any reaction?
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think Brandon was probably the father of Ashara's baby.
Awesome.
It's pretty clear. It's pretty clear that Ned didn't go with her. You know, he danced with Ashara at Harrenhal, but there was no further interaction. And Brandon seems like, you know, the kind of guy who would take what he wanted. And if Ned backed off, do we really think Brandon wouldn't, you know, go with her?
Yeah, I think that's what it comes down to. I mean, how good of a guy was Brandon, and how good of a relationship did he have?
It doesn't really matter if he was a good guy or a bad guy. It's not necessary for him to have any bad intentions, right? If Ned backs off, if he says, yeah, okay, that's okay, you know, you can go ahead. Well,
it's kind of a dick move. I mean, the little brother is like crushing on a girl. Like,
is it
since you're not gonna make a move, can I tap that? Yeah.
Is it clear that Ned was in love with Ashara though, or infatuated with her?
It's actually not.
I thought it was just like Brandon offering his brother to dance with like his girlfriend or whatever, or the girl he was hanging out with.
It's just mentioned once that Ned danced with her. That's all.
Yeah, I don't necessarily see that as like Ned was trying to get her and Brandon pushed him out of the way. I think Brandon
and Brandon was the one who asked Ashara to dance with Ned. So maybe they were already, you know, sort of headed towards a relationship, and you know, he just said, "Oh, okay, go dance with my brother. You know, can you please dance with my brother who's not dancing with anyone else?"
Yeah, I'm sure that it said that Ned, I mean, that Brandon asked for Ned. I mean, I get the impression that they were sort of talking about her, and then Brandon just was like, you know, some kind of bad movie or something. That just go talk to her or something like that, and then he went and asked her, and that's about it. But I mean, you get that thing from Caitlin in Game of Thrones about she once mentioned Ashara after she had heard some rumors from the cooks or something, and Ned went all like, never mention her name again. I think that sort of implies that he had feelings for her.
Well, the way that scene goes is Catelyn heard her maids repeating tales they heard from the lips of her husband's soldiers. So this is already like sixth hand. They whispered of Sir Arthur Dayne, ... the beautiful young sister who awaited him in a castle called Starfall on the shores of the summer sea. Lady Ashara Dayne, tall and fair, with haunting violet eyes, blah, 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 etc., etc. That was the only time in all their years that Ned had ever frightened her.
So what were Ned's options? Either he tells Catelyn that, you know, he cheated on her, or he tells Catelyn that his brother cheated on her. So there's no way he's going to tell her about Ashara, whether he slept with her or not. Because if he hadn't, then Brandon had, right? And at the time, Brandon was the one engaged to Ashara.
Catelyn, yeah.
Oh, sorry, engaged to Catelyn.
Were they? Yeah, they were, because that was the tournament at Harrenhal, right? So they were.
Yeah, the Brandon and Cat were engaged at the time. So he couldn't exactly tell Catelyn about Brandon without hurting her feelings.
Mm-hmm. That I had never actually thought about that before. I think
I just thought of that most.
Yeah, which is part of why I'm so kind of annoyed at Ned, that he protects everything and it comes at such a cost to some of the people that he's trying to protect.
I don't think it's just that. I mean, Ned would have felt bad about that he had lied to Caitlin about that. I mean, I think it speaks volumes that Ned is usually this really reserved kind of guy, and it says that was the only time that Ned had ever scared Caitlin, and he's sort of this like kind of a pushover usually, but in this one thing he really sort of got his temper up and sort of frightened Caitlin. So I think it's really personal for him. I think it.
But did it necessarily have to be about Ashara? I mean, she asked him about Jon's mother, right? And that's what he refused to tell her. It wasn't really about Ashara at all. It was about who Jon's mother was. So he was protecting Diana, probably.
That's that. Like I'm inclined to agree with you, Nadia, but the wording is kind of vague. I mean, it says it had taken her a fortnight to marshal her courage, but finally in bed one night, Catelyn asked her husband the truth of it, and all it says was, you know, like, he says, never ask me about Jon. he is my blood. That's all you need to know. And now I will know where you. Now I will learn where you heard that name, my lady. She had pledged to obey. She had told him, and from that day on, the whispering had stopped, and Ashara Dayne's name was never heard in Winterfell again. That could be Catelyn's bias. You know that her assumption is that the mother is Ashara Dayne, but we don't see the same reaction when people talk about Wyla.
It's there's a lot of conflicting information because we see with Arya in book 3 she meets Edric Dayne, and he seems to imply that there was a relationship between her father and Ashara, and like he would have been pretty close to the castle, so it seems like that would be more credible. But as you say, in that one of those Barristan chapters, the fact that he says Stark instead of Eddard Stark seems to, I don't know, that just seems a bit odd that's where the sort of theory is being drawn out of. And also the fact that Barristan in his chapters with Eddard in book 1, he seems very cordial with him. You'd think there'd be far more animosity between them if that had been the case, that Eddard had dishonored Ashara Dayne, whom Barristan obviously loves so much.
Yeah.
Well, Barristan.
In every time Barristan mentions Ned to Dany, even when Ned is not there, he's very respectful. He's
Indeed, absolutely.
He refers to Ned as Lord Stark or Eddard Stark, and here he just says, sort of in an angry way, he says Stark, which presumably means
definitely, yeah. He seems to have a lot of respect for Ned Stark, and so I don't think he would respect someone who would dishonor the woman he loves.
Well, I don't think Barristan is necessarily very sort of he doesn't wear his emotions on his sleeves. He serves with Jaime for like 15 or 14 years, even though he loathes him, and he's Kingsguard under Robert, and he hates Robert from what some of the things we read in his chapters. I mean, I don't think he's sort of very hot-blooded in that way that he would sort of hold open contempt for Ned even then.
He actively defends Ned to Dany. He actively defends him.
Yeah.
And he calls him, either Eddard Stark or Lord Stark. I don't remember which, but I maybe could brush off his actual behavior with Ned, but the fact that continues on when he literally, I mean, Dany doesn't want to hear it. She shuts him up. She does not want to hear about how Ned Stark is a good guy. She thinks that everybody who was on the usurper's side is evil, and that's really going to be very helpful to us.
Yeah, fair point. But I thought, is it confirmed that Ashara was actually pregnant? I mean, it's implied that she committed suicide after her child was stillborn and jumped from the tower, but that was also at the same time that her brother died, Arthur Dayne, so that would have been the reason as well. Yeah. I mean, I guess the serving people and the people at Starfall would have known, but we don't really hear from them apart from Edric Dayne.
Well, Cersei said something interesting, which is in Game of Thrones when she's talking to Ned when they have their very well-advised conversation. She says, you've a bastard of your own. I've seen him. Who was the mother, I wonder? Some Dornish peasant you raped while her holdfast burned, a whore? Or was it the grieving sister, the Lady Ashara? She threw herself into the sea, I'm told. Why was that? For the brother you slew or the child you stole? Now, obviously, it can't be the child he stole, because that isn't possible. That's
it could be. You never know.
Well, it could be, but either way, that can't be Brandon's son because Jon is way too old, is way too young.
Yeah, and I think Ned seems to be too nice of a guy to take a woman's child away from her.
Yeah, and also, I mean, something that the reason I glommed onto this theory so much was because I never really liked the idea of Ned sleeping with somebody before he was married. That just didn't seem in character to me. And then I read this and I was like, oh well, I guess that's canon then. And then it kind of struck me like lightning that this and the thing about Brandon had been in the same book, and I was like, that's not a coincidence. And I really don't think it is. We have the conversation about the Night of the Laughing Tree where we have the whole, Ned danced with the Ashara thing in the same book that we have Arya's conversation with Edric Dayne, which he actually does say that my Aunt Ilyrio says Lady Ashara and your father fell in love at Harrenhal. He has no doubt about that, and neither does Harwin, but the fact that in retrospect the seed of doubt that she actually danced with the wild wolf before the quiet wolf is already there, you know.
Well, the thing that strikes me though is how Martin chose to write that with Barristan saying Stark instead of him saying, you know, someone Ned Stark or Brandon Stark or Benjen Stark or whoever it is. So I kind of wonder why whether that was like a deliberate decision for him to keep this, you know, as a mystery, or if it's just a happenstance that we're making a big deal of because we're Song of Ice and Fire fans.
I know, it's very interesting. Like when I've been involved with debates and people on this, they've been like, well, what does it matter? And I'm like, you're right, it doesn't actually matter, but it doesn't actually matter if Ned was with Ashara either. And so, you know, because they didn't have children and she and Brandon didn't have children. So my only assumption would be that Ashara comes back, that Ashara is not dead and she comes back into the story somehow. I guess. You know, I'm definitely that's not a theory that I'm wed to by any means, but it would, like, I guess, justify these clues.
Okay, I can add another crackpot component to this if you want, and it's that so Brandon and Ashara fell in love and they had a baby, and it actually didn't die in stillbirth; it was born, and that was the baby that because it looks so much like the Targaryens, the Danes look identical to the Targaryens. That was the baby that was swapped for Aegon, and when she heard that its head had been smashed again to a million pieces, that's why she killed herself.
Ooh.
Well, she was one of Ilya's ladies in waiting, wasn't she?
Yeah.
Yeah, she was.
Well, that's something that's also really confusing because we don't know how long it was between the tourney and Harrenhal and the war. We actually have no idea.
Oh, it's like 3 years, I think.
Yeah, it could be, but it could be less. But like, if that's the case, then and Brandon and Ned and Ashara had a baby at Harrenhal, then the kid would have been way older than Aegon.
So when Ned comes to King's Landing, right? Aegon is already dead, right? And
yes,
the baby Aegon.
Yeah,
he
gets
dead,
there.
right?
He gets there just
so
hours
they
after.
have ravens. They have ravens, right? So presumably Ashara Dayne would, in a matter of days, hear about the slaughter of Elia and her children, right? And then she waits to commit suicide until Ned goes to the Tower of... Ned gets angry at Robert. He leaves to the Tower of Joy. He kills the Kingsguard, watches Lyanna die, takes the baby, takes the sword, goes back to Starkwall, gives her the sword, leaves, and then she decides to commit suicide.
Yeah.
Well, the straw that broke the camel's back was probably the death of her brother.
Yeah, she could have been in like a deep depression already. If the baby was conceived at Harrenhal, I think that's around a year before the War of the Usurper or something. I guess it could have been like a long depression, I guess. And as you say,
But Aegon was probably a few months old, right, at the time of the sack of King's Landing.
If it was
So they could have been the same age.
And actually, that's I just had that question now because if what Dayne sees Aegon being born in the House of the Undying, right? But then, so after Aegon was born, Rhaegar had the whole like, Ilya can't have any more kids. I need to find another broodmare for the third head of the dragon. So did that happen after the tournament at Harrenhal? Like, was Aegon born before?
I think it was
on Tower of the Hand. All it says is he was born shortly before the outbreak of Robert's Rebellion. So we don't have a.
So that would have been after the Harrenhal thing. Yeah.
In the House of the Undying, does Dany actually see the baby, or is it just Elia and Rhaegar?
I think he's.
No, there's a baby. I think there is a baby.
He's like, is this the Song of Ice and Fire? And
I mean, the only way it would make sense to me would be that it would be after Aegon's birth that he sort of gets a prophecy and then sees Lyanna and he's like, that's the one.
But so then that would have to be after Aegon was born. But we know that they were flirting with Harrenhal because he named Lyanna the Queen of Love and Beauty. So
yeah, I mean,
Rhaegar's an asshole.
Wasn't it? Was Elia at Harrenhal?
Well, her lady.
She was. That was the whole point. She was there, and he still crowned Lyanna.
He walked past her and crowned Lyanna. Yeah.
I guess there's no mention that whether she's pregnant or holding a baby or anything like that. I guess we don't have a timestamp on that.
She was sick for like half a year after she had Aegon, I think. So she probably. I bet this was before Aegon was born.
Yeah, she was probably pregnant.
So I think it would have been the Harrenhal would have been 2 years before the sack of King's Landing, because I think Jaime is described as 15 when he gets inducted into the Kingsguard, and he's 17 when Ned finds him sitting on the Iron Throne. So I guess if Ashara got pregnant at Harrenhal, she might have returned to King's Landing, had the baby, and then returned to Starfall while the Targaryens kept the baby at King's Landing. And then she find out later, and we know how slow news travels in Westeros, especially during war. She finds out later what happened to it.
But the thing is, like, I mean, anything's possible. Obviously, I always had this idea of Aegon as an infant in my head, partly because like Rhaenys was like 4, right? And like
Aegon must have been at least a year old, right? At least, because it took time for Robert's rebellion to, for Robert to take his army south, and then the whole Battle of the Trident, and then, eventually the sack of King's Landing. There must have been at least a year between those 2 points. So Aegon must have been at least a year old, and by that time, a baby's features are pretty well defined. But then his head got splashed in, so presumably
they weren't defined then.
Features. Yeah. Okay. So in the vision Dany has in the where did she have all those visions? I'm sorry. In one of those towers. Oh, sorry. House of the Undying. Okay. She saw Rhaegar speaking to a woman who is nursing a newborn babe. So the vision she had was of right after Aegon was born.
Right. Yeah.
And obviously that's not Lyanna because they'd never...
Yeah. No. It must have been earlier. Because the baby is named Aegon, so...
Right.
And Rhaegar's worried because he knows there has to be 3 heads of the dragons, and there's only 2.
God, can you imagine being Elia?
Rhaegar, yeah, he sounds like...
Yeah, that's horrible.
Yeah, like, yay, we just had a boy. Yay, we have an heir. Wonderful. Now we need another one.
Yeah, that's absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of Rhaegar.
I think, you go
I'm
back...
not either. I don't know why everyone loves him so much.
It sort of goes back and forth. It's like on one hand we see Robert's interpretation of him, which is horrible. Then we think he's actually this tragic romantic hero, and then you realize what living with a tragic romantic hero must have been like for his loved ones, which is a bit horrible again.
Yeah.
Yep.
He had the madness as well, but just a different kind of madness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's implied that he was sort of manic depressive.
Oh, that's interesting.
He had sort of like sort of black moods, and like when he would sort of sulk for days, and he would often go to Summer Hall during those days.
Yeah, he was described as very melancholic.
I think actually, if you look at the House of Undying thing, at least the Tower of the Hand write-up of it, he doesn't say that to Elia. He says that to Daenerys. Like, it says he turns to Daenerys then, and also seems to see her before saying, "There must be one more. The dragon has 3 heads."
Well,
So and then the House of Undying is probably not super literal, anyways.
Yeah.
accurate.
Might have been his internal monologue or something.
But the whole Harrenhal thing, it just sort of triggered everything, right? And it was all Rhaegar's fault.
Yeah, well, the really interesting thing about Harrenhal is how many people weren't there. So, like, none of the Tullys were there, I think because Minissa, whatever, I think she had just died.
No, she died a long time ago. Minissa died a few years after Edmure was born.
Oh, okay, so I'm not sure why Tullys were there. But none of the Tullys were there. None of the Lannisters, except for Jaime, were there because Tywin had just resigned. It's kind of like, if you think of the Southern Ambitions theory, like there's a couple of major players totally missing, and this is when everything kind of starts to go like seriously downhill.
Yeah, that's why Aerys deliberately went there, because he was worried that all the other lords were conspiring behind his back, so he showed up to show he was still around.
It's also a bit abnormal that the Starks were there, I think. I mean, they aren't usually that involved in the southern matters, I guess. Harrenhal is pretty close to the neck, comparatively, but...
I guess it was just such a big occasion that everyone was invited, all the big great houses were invited.
But shouldn't the Tullys have been there? I mean, they were the Lords Paramount of the Trident, and Harrenhal is part of that.
Do we know they're not there?
So they were...
Yeah, I mean, they could have just not been mentioned by Howland.
Yeah.
Well, we know that Catelyn wasn't there because she would probably have mentioned if she was at the tournament, right?
Well, Hoster Tully could have been there.
Yeah, could have. Maybe this was when all the stuff with Lysa was going on, actually.
Yeah, maybe. But Hoster Tully would have been there because he was the overlord, at the Trident, right? He should have
Yeah,
been
yeah.
there since it was one of his bannermen who was holding the tourney. The whole Lisa thing couldn't have been happening just then, could it?
Um,
It was after this that Brandon came to Riverrun and beat Peter Baelish, and it was after that that Lisa conceived the baby, wasn't
Isn't
it?
it? I
No,
thought
no, 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 no. Okay, she could have conceived it before.
I think Brandon died on the same trip that he dueled with Littlefinger.
yeah, he did, right? He went from there to King's Landing or whatever. Like that's where he heard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then Lisa couldn't have conceived after that because Peter Baelish would have been so weak he couldn't have done anything.
Right.
And
Could have been.
yeah, she probably conceived it beforehand. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know.
Just an idle thought. If in fact the Tullys were not there. I mean, I wonder. It kind of doesn't really make sense why they weren't there, though. Like it's.
Yeah, maybe one of them could have been there and not been mentioned.
I guess we're getting the recap from the Reed brother and sister, so it's not going to be the most detailed thing in the world. It's all
Yeah,
using
they
aliases
just
and stuff.
weren't an important player in the juicy events of Harrenhal.
Right. That's
Yeah.
true. How old is Edmure?
Edmure is
He's-
young. I think he's quite a bit younger than Catelyn because she's the one who pretty much raised him.
No, the reason I ask is because if he's like, this tournament would be what, like 18 years ago? So it could have been around that time, but you're probably right, Nadia. It's probably too early.
I think Edmure
That is
is in his 20s.
Mhm.
He's probably 9 or 10 years younger than Catelyn, or maybe even less.
That could be a reason, though. If did Edmure's mother die in childbirth? Was it?
Yeah, she did, and that was a few years after Edmure was born. So
Ah.
maybe it could have been the time when she died.
Yeah, I can't remember any of this from the book. Sorry.
But see, because Catelyn is the one who pretty much raises her siblings after her mother dies in childbirth. She gives birth to a son who dies soon after, and then she dies too. I don't know why I remember all this.
I know, it's funny what details stick out at you, right? Like some of the things you guys are talking about, I'm like, I swear I've not read that. And then some things I totally remember.
I know.
Yeah,
it's-
I usually remember all this stuff about childbirth. I don't-
I love that. Oh my god.
That's funny.
yeah. No,
Okay.
it's just such a traumatic thing. I just it sticks in my head.
And all I can think of is Batman. Shows how mature I am.
Well, if anybody if nobody else has any other questions, I guess I'll end off with a quote from Martin, which is about Brandon Stark. Somebody asked if he had any bastards, and he said it'd be an exaggeration to say that Brandon died before he could have children. It's established in the books that he was no virgin. He could very well have left some little snows in the various places he visited. But what's absolutely clear is that he had no legitimate children.
Yeah.
He was 15 when he was with Lady Dustin,
Mhm.
and 20 when he died, right?
Yeah.
So, how much do you think that he was traveling? I mean, it seemed that he was friends with all these people from the Vale and the Riverlands, like Malister and Royce, I think. So I guess he was a pretty well-traveled dude. So I guess they could be pretty.
Yeah,
much,
he was the heir.
Yeah.
He was the heir, so he was probably traveling a lot.
And if Rickard Stark did have southern ambitions, then he could have been, planting those seeds as well to kind of foster that bond between houses, the next generation down.
So do you think any of the characters that we've met could be Brandon's bastard?
That's a good question. I don't know.
I think if there was a possibility that they could be, or they could be in a way that mattered, then Martin wouldn't have answered that question that we were quoting just a little bit ago.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, probably.
I don't know. He has answered the question that whether there are descendants of Dunk around. I think the implication that Brienne is, and that's a similar question that doesn't really lead anywhere. I don't think in terms of the plot, but sort of
Yeah.
plot bit.
He could, yeah. I think if it's anyone, it's going to be someone in the north because he doesn't seem to like the relationship. The marriage alliances seem to be far more common between houses of a single province. Like the idea of marrying between kingdoms was quite rare at the time. So that the only time he goes out is to meet with Catelyn. So if there is going to be a Brandon bastard somewhere, it's going to be in the north. Because I'm just trying to think if there's any characters who could fit that bill.
No, I don't think. I think all the bastards we've seen are accounted for.
And it's mostly nobles we see in the north.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, like, if there's, a random bastard mentioned that, like, who's at Winterfell now as part of, either Manderley or Frey or whatever, like, all of the people who are congregating on Winterfell. If there's, like, a random bastard who's unassigned there, maybe that's this kid.
And they would have to be pretty old. Yeah, I can't even think of any other Snows beyond Jon and Ramsay, so yeah, I can't think of any.
There's another one. There's Lord Hornwood's bastard.
But we know he's accounted for, yeah.
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 Poor Lady Hornwood. I feel so bad for her. Lady Hornwood.
Yeah, it was a terrible way to die.
Books again. I just.
Yeah, it was horrible.
Yeah, the book 2 has some dark stuff in the north.
Oh God.
Yeah.
That's cool that you get it from like Bran's point of view.
It's fantastic. He's too innocent to understand what's going on, but yeah, it's great.
Yeah. And like they really could have saved her, and they just ugh. Okay, whatever. All right, so shall we move on to Peter?
Sure.
Go for it.
So this theory is titled "House Stark is descended from the others."
Provocative.
Let me just.
Succinct.
This is a pretty serious theory. I think there's a lot of evidence, not crackpot at all.
Yo, Vanilla, kick it one time, boy.
Yo, VIP. Let's kick it. Ice, ice, baby. Ice, ice, baby. All right, stop. Collaborate and listen. I sit back with my brand new invention. Something grabs a hold of me tight.
So yeah, this theory is. Let me just start this out with sort of a poll of sorts. Do you guys think that sort of interbreeding between the various races of Westeros is possible? Like not like the First Men and the Rhoynar and the Andals, but like Giants and the First Men and Children of the First.
A couple of houses seem to be implied to be descendant from giants, like the Cleganes.
Yeah, I think Umbers.
Umbers, yeah. The only other thing I can think of between like First Men and others is the Night's King, where he mates with another, and I don't think they produce any children, but it's obviously a very evil union.
Yeah, no, I think it's sort of implied, or at least they share a lot of the same themes, that the Reeds and the Crannogmen in general are quite close to the Children of the Forest in their sort of way of life.
Although I suppose the Targaryens are sort of implied to have some blood of the dragon in them, like a biological sense. That's why the dragons are so much more at ease around them. And the Starks obviously seem to have some connection to the wolves. I don't know if that implies breeding, but some kind of biological connection or spiritual connection at least.
Well, yeah, but there's quite a bit leaked from like a giant or a Children of the Forest. They're like humanoids anyway. They're quite similar to humans, but dragon is like a different sort of thing. Well, there are quite a few quotes about this stuff.
It's
kind of mentioned them in passing, but here's a doc that I documented some of them. So in Game of Thrones, in one of Bran's chapters, when we see Hodor's swinging manhood in the Godswood, Osha says that he has giant's blood in him, and goes into detail about the interbreeding between giants and the First Men. She says that women giants take men for lovers, and that's where the half-bloods come. So I think Osha is usually pretty much on the money, but that could be kind of a legend too, I guess. Yeah. But I think there's...
Maybe Hodor has some, facial features that are more giant than...
Osha wasn't looking at his
some
facial
features.
I pulled up the
I had almost erased that scene from my memory, and then
burned into your eyelids.
Yeah.
I pulled up the wiki on Night's King, and somebody has created a fan art of him and his apparent other bride getting it on the Westeros wiki.
Lovely.
Yeah, I thought that the other stuff there's evidence for others and men interbreeding as well, but there's also the fact that I think the Crannogmen and the children, the Reeds, the the people of the Neck, that they are like the children of the forest. There's a quote from Theon's chapter in A Clash of Kings that Maester Lewin says that the histories say that Cranach men grew close to the children of the forest. I think that's quite vague, but I got this idea from a podcast of Ice and Fire episode, actually. It's episode 39 called Intermingling, which is one of my favorite episodes. Has a great quest appearance from Apocalypse Dan. I recommend you listen to it. But there isn't much on the children, but yeah, on the others, there is quite a bit. Danny, you mentioned the Night King. There's that story that Bran relates from Old Nan, that the 13th commander of the Night's Watch sort of spied a cold woman from atop the wall and took her for his bride and did all sorts of evil things, and did in fact sort of mate with her. And in Bran's very first chapter, you get from Old Nan again this idea that about the wildlings, these sort of rumors that their women lay with the others in the long night to sire terrible half-human children. So do you guys think this is legit, that these different humanoids can interbreed?
Old Nan is always right.
Of course.
Always.
So,
I think it does seem to be suggested by the text.
So we're gonna see ice spiders at some point, is what you're saying.
Ice spiders.
yeah,
And ice dragons.
Yeah. If these guys are getting dragons, then the others should have a dragon too, right?
It's only fair, yeah.
It's only fair.
Dragons!
It's only fair.
Frost breath, yeah. The other example I thought of, Peter, was the Mormonts, who seem to mate with, like, bear wargs or something like that.
Bears.
Mm-hmm.
Tormund says it, and
Yeah,
even that girl in Dance of Dragons, it's with Asher. Alysanne, I think, she says her husband was a bear or a warg bear or something like that. So definitely that intermingling of species.
Well, that gets ridiculous. That's bears. And this is like talking about serious stuff here, like ice demons and giants.
Sorry, I was way off course.
Good point.
Yeah,
what was I thinking?
I think the sort of warging thing actually comes from the children of the forest. It might have been sort of like interbreeding, or just that the first men were taught the sort of magics and the arts of the children, because I'm pretty sure that it's only first men who are wargs. There are no Andal or Rhoynar wargs that we know of, or any from Essos. Bloodraven's mother was a Blackwood, and they are first men, and they have quite a culture. Even the sigil is a weirwood tree.
That's a great point, yeah. Yeah,
but how this ties into House Stark is that I found this quote in Catelyn's first chapter about Ice, the sword. It says that it's a Valyrian steel sword, obviously, but it says that the name that it bore was older still, a legacy from the Age of Heroes when the Starks were the kings in the north. So the fact that the blade is named Ice, I thought that who else has ice swords in this setting? The others do. And I looked a little more into that, and Martin actually has an interview where he has talked about a little bit about the others and their art of shaping ice. So the interviewer asked Martin, do you know what substance an other sword is made of? And he answered, ice, but not like regular old ice. The others can do things with ice that we can't imagine and make substances of it.
Ah.
So
Must have done a little dance when you read that, huh?
yeah, I tend to pick up the sword things in these books a lot.
Although,
but
isn't ice isn't that like a 400-year-old Valyrian blade?
It is.
It is. But
the quote
the name is older.
Oh, okay.
It's in the name it bore was older still, a legacy from the Age of Heroes.
Oh, cool.
So I think that's very significant that
so.
it's called ice, because we do see in the prologue of Game of Thrones, we do see the ice blades of the others. And this sort of the ice magic and shaping ice of the others, that sort of brought into my mind more that what other thing that is made of ice is in the north that's kind of a big deal.
The wall.
Yep. And the wall has some powerful magic in it. And we know that Brandon the Builder built the wall, and Brandon the Builder is often thought of as the founder of House Stark. So I thought that Brandon the Builder must have sort of had somehow learned the magics of the others to raise up the wall. We know that other magics than the sort of ice magic, that's not confirmed, but we know that the children's magic were used in the wall as well, because the black gate isn't made of weirwood, and it's sort of wood and nature, and that stuff is for the children. But I think it's very significant that the wall is made of ice, and the others are known for making things of ice.
But why would? But wasn't the wall built to keep the others out? Like, why would Brandon build it if he's descendant
Yeah,
of the
maybe
others?
Brandon the Builder was half human, half others, and he yeah, why would he pick one side over the other?
Yes, I thought about that as well, that he might have been half, and he was sort of a rebel, kind of like Prometheus, that he stole the art of ice and gave it to humans and used it against the others. There's some evidence of the others living sort of alongside or having some sort of relationship with humans, because Craster worships them as gods and sacrifices to them, and it's implied that the others actually raise his babies and they become Craster's sons or something. And what else? Of course, the Night King, he sort of marries the other woman, and they enthrall the watch, and they... Yeah, I think that sort of sets up a precedent that there is sort of some kind of relationship that can develop between humans and others, that they can serve them and stuff like that. So I thought that Brandon the Builder, perhaps he was sort of like maybe a slave or a half other living among them, and sort of somehow got their secrets and their magics, and then used it against them, and sort of with all the other humans and children fought against the others in the long night.
That's a really good point about the wall, though, because, you know, we kind of don't think about that, but obviously that was some huge magic to put that thing up, and obviously it was ice magic, because it's ice.
And it specifically wasn't the magic of the children of the others, because as you say, their magic is in nature, but this is ice.
Children of the others?
Children of the forest, sorry. Their magic is in nature.
He's converted you already to his theory.
That's right, yeah. But yeah, as you say, I do like the idea of them learning the craft of ice to be able to use that kind of ice magic. The only thing I'm not sure that if he was actually another would be like his face in the crypts of Winterfell would actually look more like another, whereas it just looks like a man.
But how do we know what the others look like? I mean, we haven't seen them the way George has thought of them. The ones in the TV show are not necessarily...
Doesn't he describe their faces? Like
they are pretty human looking. I mean, they're pretty ethereal. They're not corporeal. They have human like features, but they're very alien, and they're beautiful in a way. They're just sort of pale as milk, and
they're elves.
Yeah, they're basically like snow demon.
Has anyone seen Brandon the Builder's statue?
Well, I don't think so.
We haven't seen it yet.
It's
right?
down there somewhere. Though.
I mean, it probably is, but we haven't seen it. And Brandon the Builder lived 8,000 years ago, didn't he?
Yeah, I don't think those dates are accurate. I think those are a lot of sort of exaggeration. We get that from one of Sam's chapters when he's sort of exploring the walls of the library at the wall.
Yeah, even 1,000 years is quite a long time.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean,
does it say what color hair they have? So like silver hair or something?
The others, they have. I think I'm not sure if the hair is particularly mentioned, but I think it's probably white. But the Starks, they have brown hair and grey eyes.
Because I feel like Bran would have seen that when he saw all the faces of the previous Kings of the North or Kings of Winter. He would have noticed that.
Well, there's something about
in stone, they wouldn't necessarily have looked. You know,
no, but Brandon sees the faces of all the previous Kings of Winter, so he would have noticed.
Does he?
Yeah, when he's going backwards in time and seeing all the people, all the kings who knelt before the weirwood tree in Winterfell's forest.
But not all of them, right? He just sees flashes.
Yeah.
Well, the last vision that he sees is the woman cutting the man's throat, that blood sacrifice thing, with the bronze sickle. So that's First Men before the arrival of the Andals.
He doesn't see all of the rulers of the North.
But he's going back in time through the.
I think that blood sacrifice that's for the weirwoods. That's not for the others, because it's implied that the children of the forest weren't nice dudes either. I mean, they were a beautiful and dark people. I think Maester Lewin says it's. I think it's pretty clear that they use blood sacrifice for the weirwoods. There's a lot of the imagery, sort of that they have blood-red leaves and always weeping blood, and the sap is red and all that. And when Davos is in White Harbor, I think that one of the jailers tells him that they used to hang the entrails on the weirwoods or something like that.
Had they, had the First Men and the Children of the Forest and everybody, had they made that pact during the time of the Age of Heroes?
Yes, the pact actually that began the Age of Heroes. It was the Dawn Age before that, and after the pact, and the Long Night was during the Age of Heroes.
Right. Okay. I was actually just listening to the History of Westeros podcast on this, and remember very little of it because, frankly, a lot of it is boring. But yeah. So. No, nothing against the podcast, but like it's a lot of really, really old history, and like we don't really know that much. So it's like, after a certain point, like it's all like Brandon's, and I'm just like, okay.
I feel kind of bad that I probably know more about the history of Westeros than I knew about real history. I mean,
yeah, that's true for all of us. Don't feel bad.
Oh yeah,
don't feel bad. That's all of us.
And we don't have dragons.
Yeah, if real history had more dragons, it might be more interesting.
I still think, well, I don't think, but a very small part of me wants to think that there must have been dragons in China because that's where all this mythology came from.
Hey, there was once this documentary on Discovery a long time ago, which had this dinosaur age thing that had lungs that could withstand fire or something, and it could. I don't remember the documentary. It was just this thing that could have breathed fire.
I think they had a documentary of like if dragons existed, and they messed up a lot of people's minds because like they have like a fake specimen and everything, and like people actually thought that this was a dragon, and yeah, I was very inspired by that documentary actually. But
well, we want to go down the route. I think
seen this one on Discovery.
There's a lot of sort of really weird animals that have sort of those kind of natural weapons, like the fish that spit water, and I think there's a lot of sort of bugs and all kinds of things that have all kinds of sort of natural weapons where they use muscle spasms and chemicals in their body to do all sorts of things. Though you could maybe imagine that some might have like a fire breathing ability.
Can an organism produce fire, though?
Well, if it like mixes, this is something from some movie, I'm sure, but if it mixes like two like compounds or something, or chemicals, and spits them out.
Well, you have acid in your stomach, right? Everyone has acid in their stomach, and then you have...
acid isn't
and you have sodium and water inside you, right? You can just mix the two and have instant fire.
Instant fire.
If you could somehow
just do that, guys.
Sodium.
Flawless logic.
Well, there's also
it's not working.
You're doing it wrong.
You have Komodo dragons though in our day too, and I think I've heard some theories that
fire.
It may have been that fire thing might have come from the fact that their bite, when they bite you, it sort of infects the wound so badly that you get a fever, and that's sort of fire.
Feel like it's on fire.
Yeah, but I guess Komodo dragons are they're in a very remote place of the world, and there's mythology about dragons pretty much everywhere.
That's a truly horrible, horrible way to die.
Yeah, those are like the worst things on earth. Komodo dragons.
That's how mythology begins, though.
I'd like to meet one for research, and then you guys turn me off of that. I'm going to Wikipedia them.
Okay, well, going back to the others and all that. I don't think there's a statue of Bran the Builder in the tombs, at least. I don't think it's mentioned, but that sort of the kings in the north are also called the Kings of Winter, so I think that might tie into the fact that they might have had sort of some sort of grasp of like ice magic or something like that. But I guess there's also the fact that Winterfell was supposedly also built by Bran the Builder, and it's built out of stone, and it sort of also incorporates the sort of natural hot springs there to heat it. So that's not.
And it had help from the giants, right? Bran the Builder had help from the giants to build Winterfell.
He did for the wall. I don't know about Winterfell.
I think I read somewhere. I don't really remember.
It's one of those things that's said, but you don't know if you're supposed to take it seriously or
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
Yeah, the wall
Everything
might have
from
been
the
like
Age
a
of
joint
Heroes
project
is
from all the old races, like they got the ice magic from the others and the sort of Blackgate weirwood stuff from the Children of the Forest, and then the giant sort of just hard labor, I guess.
Also, you have to take into account that the wall wasn't built all in one go. It was actually pretty short when it began, and previous generations of Night's Watchmen have built it up and up and up. So I don't know how that
Have they?
knowledge of ice magic has been sustained. But yeah, that's what Martin says. It was quite short at the beginning, but each new generation of Night's Watchmen built more.
Yeah, but they must have, because the wall has wards all around it for the others and the whites, so they must have had something to like put the wards if it was only a short stretch at the beginning.
And it's not just ice; it
Aren't
is
the
stone as well.
wards below the wall? Aren't the wards concentrated around the bottom of the wall, around the gates?
You would think so, because I mean, if because you want to make sure that they can't just dig under it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the foundations would be the really magical part, and I guess the higher bits would just be stone with ice encased in ice of the wind and stuff. And it's described as having its own atmosphere at a point. It was rather its own kind of like the ice actually evaporates and goes into the air and then sort of attaches itself to the higher parts of the wall, and it's got its own ecosystem almost.
And it's got the thing that it's the wall defense itself. That could be just superstition, but it might be actually some sort of like, if it has some kind of sentience, because the Black Gate, it has some kind of sentience. I mean, it asks questions and can sort of grant entry to those that answer rightly, I guess. There might be some kind of like artificial intelligence in the wall.
It just has a password. That's all. It's just a
but
wall
that's
with a password.
high-tech stuff.
Yeah, that's quite right.
And no, not anyone who says the words can pass, right? It has to be a man of the Night's Watch.
Yeah, I guess that's, I mean...
Or has somebody tried otherwise?
Well, it can't be someone who's anything like another, because Cold Hands couldn't do it.
Yeah.
I think it probably also has to be a brother of the watch that has sworn before a weirwood tree, because if they just did it in the sept, the weirwood wouldn't know that guy was sworn. Sam did swear with John at the weirwood grove.
Now that's interesting. That's actually very interesting. I never thought of that before, but it could be just the weirwood's memory. It's calling back on its memory to find who has actually taken the vow or not.
Yeah, but I don't remember the actual sort of makeup of the Black Gate. Was it just roots, or was it actually like a door?
It was a door with a face on it, I think.
Wasn't it like it opened like a door from like Star Wars or something, like it's sort of like uncoiled or something? It wasn't just a regular old door, was it?
Yeah, I can't remember.
Oh, I don't know, but another thing I thought about was that when Ygritte is on top of the wall, she sort of feels this sort of real sense of sort of malevolence from the wall, that it's sort of this evil thing, and something like, we never found the horn of Joramun to bring this cold thing down. And she also mentioned that Mans and the wildlings were digging in the Frostfangs to find the horn of Joramun, and they opened the graves and let loose shades into the world. I thought that those shades might have been the others that were imprisoned in the Frostfangs by the same ice magic that they used to build the wall. Because, I'm not exactly sure on the timeline of when the others started attacking the north and when Mans was sort of amassing or became the king beyond the wall.
I always thought of those shades as being whites.
Well, shade, I think that implies sort of like an incorporeal sort of like this sort of ethereal kind of thing. I mean, I guess that's just from other fantasies that I've consumed that I know that, but it could be. But
the Ygritte's using that
but
word.
It could just be it could just be a word for whites. They hold they are shades of their former life, right?
Well, no, I think
it could just be that.
Brandon.
Well, why would she call them what? She knows the right words to use, doesn't she?
Bran remembers seeing Eddard's ghost, and they call it the Shade. So I think, as you say, it is more like a spirit rather than a zombie thing.
Well, I mean, but the others aren't zombies. They are like ghosts, more like they are translucent and ethereal. They're not sort of physical necessarily, I guess. Tormund talks about this in the Dance of Dragons with Jon, that how can you fight mist and all that, like you can't sort of see them, and I guess that would support the sort of ice shade thing that the others are.
That's true. Although, I mean, Mance would, presumably he would be trying to find the horn because he was being chased by the others at this point, so they probably already would have been an active force against them. That's why they were trying to bring down the wall.
That makes sense to me. The whole wildling like plan that Mance has sold them, that like we need to get through the wall. Like, okay, we need to get through the wall, but why would you knock it down?
Well, it's a threat to use against the Night's Watch, I guess.
Right, but all the
last
wildlings
resort.
believe they seem to be like, yeah, hell, let's knock down the wall, you know. And it's like the others will just climb over it and come after you.
I guess.
Yeah, I don't think that.
Where are you gonna hide then?
Yeah.
I guess the further south you go, the warmer it gets, maybe, so they'll be safer the further down they go. But if with the wall there, they're always trapped, so they need that as a last resort, I guess.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think that wildlings might they definitely regard the wall a lot more in a lot more hostile manner than a lot of like southerners do. Like people south of the wall, they think it's an evil thing, and they're probably right about that if it was raised with the sort of magic of the others. So they
raised with the others. Why would it keep them out?
Well, they wove the sort of wards in there underneath it, I guess. If it's their own technology, I guess.
It has the children's magic underneath, right?
Yeah, it's almost like the
That's how it's
infrastructure
keeping
is
them
the
out.
magic of the others, but the entrances are the magic of the Children of the Forest.
But I'm not sure about the timeline about Mance and him digging in the Frostfangs. I mean, did he become king beyond the wall only after the others started attacking? I mean, that's the way he sort of amassed the whole horde and united all the tribes, but did he sort of crown himself king before the others started attacking? I mean, he talks about how he sort of like converted all these tribes by defeating their chieftains and all that. Like, I think Ned and Caitlin talk about the king beyond the wall in the Godswood. I guess that's a little bit after the others started attacking, but he sort of seems like an established figure already at this point.
It must have taken years for him to bring all of these people together.
I also think it's one thing to to say, oh, I'm king beyond the wall, and, to sort of be accepted at that. And it's another to actually get everybody to go along and do what you want in, as far as this plan of gathering in the Frostfangs and all that.
Well, we don't know how long the others have been like a threat that has been palpable. Like how long have people been dying and rising from the dead? The first we get a sense of it is at the beginning of the book, and that's kind of the first incident that the Night's Watch becomes aware of. But that's not, it's probably not the first incident that Mance was aware of. He must have been starting before that, because it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I think so.
The threat of the others has probably been building up slowly, since, the others probably need winter to start their attack or whatever that they do, and they probably started in the lands of always winter, and then they started moving south, right, as it got colder.
Maybe they never really went away and beyond the wall either. Maybe they've always
exactly.
Been
they
around.
could have been there. Yeah, they could have just been building up power or whatever, and then Mance had at least a few years of summer. It's been one of the longest summers in recorded history, right? And Mance had these years to sort of build up his support system.
It's hard to get an impression of what the others are in form, because they're described, as you say, Peter, as both a mist, but also as almost like human beings, like this kind of like knights with honor. They actually take turns fighting that guy, that member of the Night's Watch. So I don't know if they're physical beings that live in ice palaces or something, or they're just these kind of spirits that come with the winter winds. Maybe both.
I tend to imagine that mist as like something that they could sort of control and send against humans, or and that was kind of like their magic or something like that. Not not like them in incorporeal form, but I guess it could just as well be that.
Like a cloak, yeah.
I think the mist might be. I assume that their sort of presence is what reanimates the corpses into whites. That's what happens in the prologue and all that. I guess they don't really need to like lay hands on the corpses for them to become whites, but they definitely bring that sort of like the cold with them, I think, when they go somewhere.
And I mean, we also have, Osha saying that she might be a decent marker, actually. Because she said that, she and those other guys got the hell out of Dodge when that started to happen, right? And they started to become aware of, people dying and coming back. And then they were like, we're out of here.
Yeah, I think the others might have been sort of there might have been some around beforehand, but it's definitely sort of ramped up in recent times. I mean, Craster, I don't know how long he's been doing what he's doing, but he's been sacrificing his sons to the others for some time now, so I don't know how long that's been, but it seems like it's been maybe decades.
Yeah, at least 30 years probably.
And there's the Night's Queen as well. I mean, that was after the long night, so they all couldn't have gone away, but they're definitely mounting another big assault now that's not been seen in a long time.
Well, the other thing about the Night's King incident that I don't know if anyone actually said earlier was that Old Nan says, oh yeah, he was totally a Stark. The Night's King was.
She lists a couple of different people. Yeah, she says Bolton.
She says some people say it's this and some people say it's that, but he was a Stark, and then he. Yeah, I think at least her version of the story is that he was a Stark.
I think Old Nan knows that it's a better story if it's a Stark, and I guess Martin is a storyteller too, so I guess he knows too that it's a better story if it's a Stark.
You can't scare Bran if you're like, oh yeah, this guy was totally a Tyrell.
One of the houses that Old Nan mentions is Bolton. Before I thought about this theory, I long thought that Boltons might actually have sort of other blood in their line, because they're sort of very cruel and sort of really shitty, and they have the ice blue eyes and all that. But I guess there's not much more to it.
Yeah, they seem to be a lot closer to the first men that Bran sees sacrificing that guy into the Weirwood Roots than the Starks.
It's I just
according to you just sent me this you just sent us this link in case
yeah, that was a joke.
It actually no, if you read down, it says according to legend the others speak a language known in myth as Kroth.
But this is the Game of Thrones wiki. This is for the TV show, not the books.
Oh.
I don't think that's on the Westeros wiki, but that might be one of the conlang that's a constructed languages that they've done for the show. I think I've actually seen something about that.
Oh, it is, yeah, it is.
The language is something like sort of described in the books as it's sort of like cracking ice or something like that.
Yeah.
But well, one thing I actually that did occur to me was in Catelyn's first scene when she's in bed with Ned and everything, and then he opens the windows, and doesn't she say something they're always talking about how the North is in his blood.
I mean, I've got the window open right now, and it's minus 20 degrees Celsius outside. That might be just
new theory. Peter is descended from the other.
Peter's another.
Yeah, I think that's just from the Starks living in the North.
Well, something else that I thought was that maybe this is maybe it's in response to how Brandon the Builder was kind of the first king in the North and whatever, and now that there's going to be another king in the North in terms of Robb and everything, maybe the others were sensing that, but the timing doesn't really work out because it was probably going on way before that. And
yeah, I guess the last king in the North would be Torrent, the king who knelt. That was 300 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, I mean, unless we want to think that the others have some sort of, their equivalent to the Weirwood network, like the Snow Blossom network or something.
Right.
So they can, sort of see outside of time.
Well, Bran in his when he's in a coma and he sort of flies with Bloodraven, he does go into the lands of always winter and sees something terrible and cold in there. So, I mean, that's not through the Weirwoods, I think. I mean, I guess Bran is just sort of doing an astral projection or something. I don't know, but I guess the others could have that as well,
or something similar.
Well, there's something there, but I don't know. I mean, it's really interesting. I just it's hard because the others are the bad guys, and it's hard to conceive of a scenario where the Starks or any kind of good human force would have come from the others. But I mean, Correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like Martin has said at some point, like we'll find out what the others are doing. Like it's like they're
what their motivations are.
I hope so,
like
yeah.
evil world conquering people.
Yeah, I mean, my theory, my thought isn't really that Starks are like evil or sinister because they have this. It's more that the ancient Starks sort of were heroes because they were sort of defectors from decadence or something.
Yeah.
They sort of rebelled against them and used their own sort of magic against them, and they sort of were heroes because of that. But it's still something was stained to their lineage, I guess.
Maybe everyone in the North knows this, and that's why they're so loyal to the Starks, because they're too scared of, making them angry.
Because I'll get you.
Yeah.
The secret to everybody.
Yeah.
I guess I could conclude this that my theory isn't necessarily that the Starks are descended from others, but definitely that some sort of like kind of shady magic went into building the wall that could have come from the others.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. And I guess
I really like that notion.
I guess of all the first men, they're the ones that would have the most contact with the others. Because I guess, I don't know, we hear about how the others attacked, but I'm wondering if there were periods where they weren't at war with each other. And there was a kind of uneasy, not truce, but an uneasy kind of living side by side as there was with the Children of the Forest. Because all these three species or races or whatever you want to call them lived on Westeros for a couple of thousand years before the Andals or the Royal ever set foot on the continent.
Yeah, and the giant as well. I mean, that's what I was talking about earlier. I think that's likely that they had sort of some kind of working relationship with the others. Some of the first men did anyway.
And of all
worship them as gods, because Craster does that even today.
And of all the first men, the Starks would have been furthest north. I guess maybe there would have been wildland clans, like the Fens and stuff.
Yeah, but at the time of the Long Night, I don't think the divide between the Northmen and the Wildlings would have been established yet, because the wall wasn't built.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, the Wildlings aren't ethnically different, right? They're just
they're all first
happen
men,
to be separated by a wall. Yeah.
Although I suppose it was kind of a decision that they didn't want to kneel to the king in the north, so they stayed on their side.
Yeah.
Is that pretty true?
I think so, yeah.
And we don't know what happened back then.
Yeah, I think
that's their attitude now.
Hmm.
They don't want to kneel.
Again, we might not be given enough information. That's why I'm looking forward to the history of Ice and Fire book.
Yeah.
Well, who are they going to kneel to? They were going to kneel to the Starks, right? There was no unified kingdom at that point.
But they would have been the kings in the north. The Starks would have been the kings in the north. They didn't want to kneel to them. That's what they call them, kneelers.
Yeah, maybe if the Starks did lead the sort of the fight against the others in the Long Night, they sort of saw the benefits of a strong leader there and like a unified force. And some of them went over the wall because of that, and the others sort of refused to accept that and stayed and like fished and hunted and all that wildling stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stole women, raped them. All that.
No, it's stealing them.
Whatever.
I know. One of the scariest moments for me was like reading the books and like when a Greek goes like, well, if you couldn't fight back, then you deserve it. And I was like, oh my God, that's the scariest thing I've ever read, like in all of these books. And then people are like, yeah, Grit's such a badass. And I'm like, yeah, no, whatever. One thing that did occur to me is maybe the reason the others are so pissed off is because, how we've had like these successive waves of immigration to Westeros. Maybe that was kind of where, like, the others were there first, and then the Children of the Forest came, and then, like, so that's kind of where that happened. Like, maybe, the Children of the Forest are not even the original inhabitants of the land.
Yeah. I guess the other are described as living in the far north, and while the first men and the Children of the Forest got together, I mean, they warred at one point, but then they finally signed a truce and lived in the sort of main part of Westeros, and then all of a sudden the others start pouring in from the far north. So maybe there wasn't as much contact. It's hard to tell. It's all mythology, I guess.
As much as we know so little.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so I guess we will go on to our final panelist. I keep messing this up. Sorry, guys, I'm a little tired. Dan, why don't you start your theory, which has a lot of letters in it?
Oh, letters.
Yeah, I just made that up. The I plus S minus V equals AB.
What? Could you repeat that?
Carry this out.
Yeah, the idea that that Aegon, who we're told is Aegon the Sixth, is actually a Blackfyre who's descended from Ilyrio Mopatis and his wife Sarah. So that's the Aegon Blackfyre theory. I wasn't able to find how long exactly it's been around, but it's definitely been around since Dance, and we got a bunch of new, sort of new information that the Blackfyres are relevant to the nowadays portion of the tale. But the theory, more or less, is that Illyrio's beloved wife Sarah is actually a descendant of Daemon Blackfyre in some way, or one of his, because Daemon had 7 sons, so there was a lot of descendants there, so there could be one hanging around in the female line. So after she dies, Illyrio decides that what he wants to do for her memory is to put her son on the Iron Throne. Maybe she even could have told him that she wanted that. I don't know. He decides that he can't put the son on the throne, saying this is Aegon Blackfyre, the rightful heir, because nobody really even remembers who the Blackfyres are other than the Golden Company. So he decides to try to pass him off as Aegon the Sixth, and sends him off to be raised by Jon Connington, and all the stuff that we know, basically. And the idea being that Illyrio is doing this for his private satisfaction and, in his wife's memory, so he doesn't really care that everyone else will think it's Aemon Targaryen, or Aegon Targaryen, I should say, but he'll know the truth. So, and he enlists Varys to help with this, and how I would tie it in with Dany and Viserys is that Illyrio was just using them as camouflage, basically. And
I actually like this theory.
Yeah. I mean, the main reason that I like it is just because it gives us a reason for how much Martin is telling us about the Blackfyres. Because it's not just in Dunk and Egg anymore. Now it's broken out in in Dance with Dragons, and there's all the kind of stuff. And the main sort of direct evidence is the Tyrion chapters where he's traveling with Illyrio to the Royne there to meet up with Connington and that. So yeah, there's a couple of quotes that I had written down here from the book where Illyrio sort of obviously has some kind of affection for the boy Aegon, where he says, and the one quote is, "There's a gift for the boy in one of the chests, some candied ginger. He was always fond of it." Illyrio sounded oddly sad. "I thought I might continue on to Goyandroyu with you, a farewell feast before you start downriver." And then Halden Halfmaster says, "No, we can't do that. Griff wants to leave ASAP." And then a little bit later, good fortune, Illyrio is called after them. "Tell the boy I am sorry I will not be with him for his wedding. I will rejoin you in Westeros. That I swear by my sweet Sarah's hands." The last Tyrion Lannister saw of Ilyrio Mopatis, the Magister was standing by his litter in his brocade robes. His massive shoulders slumped. As his figure dwindled in the dust, the Lord of Cheese looked almost small. So those two passages, show that he has some sort of sentimental attachment to the kid, whoever the kid is. So
yeah,
that's great.
But there's not really much hard evidence for it, I'll be honest.
And I like
theory
this.
Is actually sort of I sort of accept this as gospel because it's just so compelling. I think, as you said, it just pays off on all that Blackfyre world building we get in the Dunk and Egg novellas.
The original reason that I really liked it was that it gives us a good reason for Illyrio to be meddling in Westeros. Because really, why does a Magister of Pentos want to mess around in Westeros? He's already basically as rich as he can ever be, so money doesn't make sense. And it sort of gives him, and then Varys is in it basically because Illyrio is his friend. So that's one of the main reasons I like about it. But what do you guys think?
Yeah, it's certainly possible. I mean, he certainly could have gotten the Valyrian looks from Illyrio's wife. And it would be kind of cool to see the Blackfyres return again through Aegon.
And Martin specifically.
Because that's the whole point of the Golden Company being formed was that, they were a company in exile that was trying to go back home. And now Aegon is, sort of leading them back to Westeros, and it's kind of interesting if he's actually a Blackfyre, and it was one of his ancestors that formed the Golden Company. So it's kind of cool. It's just I like that.
And yeah, I've heard
Well,
this...
somebody on.
Sorry, you go.
Oh, go ahead. You go ahead.
I was just going to say, I've heard this theory a couple of times, but what I like about this version is that Illyrio is the only one who knows about it. Like, I assume Varys was in on it, the Black Company, the Golden Company were in on it, because they sort of originally, the original motive was to put a Blackfyre on the throne, but the idea that it's just Illyrio that knows about it, and he's doing it in the memory of his wife, that's awesome.
It kind of works either way. Like maybe Varys knows, maybe Varys thinks that it really is Aegon. You know, it can kind of work either way. And the other thing I saw pointed out by somebody on Reddit was that Miles Toyne, who was the commander of the Golden Company until recently, that his family really, really suffered from the Targaryens. So would he really be willing to switch and go back to a Targaryen? And he's the one who must have made the original agreement with Illyrio.
So, John Connington, we get most of this information from his POV, I think. So how did he join the Golden Company? He fled Westeros in exile. Did he go to Pentos after that and meet Illyrio? Or how did
No, he first joined the Golden Company, and then he left. I think while he was with the Golden Company, Illyrio contacted him to take care of Rhaegar's son. And
okay, so he didn't know about the
that's what happened.
Gary guy who smuggled Daenerys and Viserys out, I guess. But did Connington know Blackheart from before?
He in one of his chapters he talks about being close with him like once he was in exile, but it didn't make clear whether they would have known each other before. But I think the Toynes would have already been in exile in Connington's time because they were in exile from Aegon the Unworthy.
Simon Toyne was the knight who slept with the queen.
Wasn't Simon Toyne the
or one
Brotherhood?
of his mistresses?
The Outlaw Brotherhood, wasn't he? Or the Kingswood Brotherhood?
That was Simon Toyne, the Kingswood Brotherhood.
That would have been Aerys' time, though.
Oh yeah, you're right. So I guess there were still some Toynes around.
But is it the same? What's the Blackheart's first name?
Miles.
Right. So, but Aegon the Unworthy had a lot of these sort of things where he killed the lover of his lover or something like the Dragon Knight and
lover of his mistresses or one of his mistresses.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So was the sort of original exiled Toyne one of those then?
Yeah, he was found with with Aegon the Unworthy's mistresses. So he had him either exiled or killed. I don't remember which, but he had several brothers, and they all tried to kill Aegon the Unworthy in reprisal for whatever Aegon did to the first Toyne, and then they were then killed by Aemon the Dragon Knight.
So everything the Targaryens do comes back to haunt them later.
It's the case for every family, it seems.
But these people don't seem to go away.
Yeah, I guess.
Speaking of the Golden Company, what do you guys think the sword Blackfyre is the thing that gave the house its name?
That was another thing that I saw in the Reddit thread that I was reading, was that people had said that back before Dance came out, when George was reading some of the preview chapters, like one time he read that the Tyrion 2 is the preview chapter, and there was a little bit more in it, like some material had been cut. And one of the things that was in it was a conversation between Illyrio and Haldon Halfmaester, where they were speaking in some dialect of Valyrian that Tyrion couldn't understand, but he just picked up a few words, and one of them was sword.
Oh yeah, that I think that was in that FB word actually posted that in one of the thread.
Oh yeah.
It's I think it was that I don't think the candied ginger was in that version that was in. I think it's Martin Reddit at some sort of Khan or something. And it was sort of transcribed.
So you replaced a reference to Blackfyre with a reference to Ginger.
Yeah. So it's that Illyrio says that there's a present for him in the chests, and I guess the implication originally was that it was Blackfyre, but then it's replaced with candied ginger.
Well, I think Blackfyre has to be somewhere like out of sight, because no one ever sort of like refers to it. Like Barristan doesn't say, "Oh yeah, and I got Blackfyre when I killed, and took it back when I killed Meleys the Monstrous," or anything like that. So, I think it's got to have dropped out of sight.
So did Meleys the Monstrous have Blackfyre? Because I remember from the third Duncan Egg
No,
book, they
I don't
didn't
think
have
he
the
did.
sword. Yeah, I assumed that.
We don't.
Yeah,
I
Bitter Steel kept the sword and didn't give it to his nephew. But
okay.
it's presumably with the Golden Company. I mean, where else would it be? You don't just lose a Valyrian sword.
Well, I don't know.
It has to show up sometime, right?
The current sort of leadership of the Golden Company is really suspect. I mean, Harry Strickland, he isn't very impressive. And
He seems like he might lose a Valyrian sword.
yeah.
Drop it in the river.
But he's just become the commander of the Golden Company recently, right? Before that, it was Milestone was apparently a very competent guy, right? If
Yes.
they still had the sword, they'd known. It would have been mentioned somewhere, Or are the commanders just keeping it in hiding, waiting for something to happen? Or...
I guess it wouldn't do to give it to Aegon, like, this is Aegon Targaryen, but he's holding Blackfyre, I mean, and
Wink.
leading the Golden Company, like, yeah, nothing suspicious here, so this is definitely a Targaryen.
Well, it was originally
maybe-
the Conqueror's sword, though. So
Yeah.
in some ways, it would be
Maybe
just
their
perfect.
maybe the plan is once Aegon takes the throne, then they'll give him Blackfyre. Once he's fulfilled his promises, given them back their lands and whatever they're looking for, given them all the money, then they give him Blackfyre.
Yeah, it's kind of a double-edged sword, pardon the pun, but it's sort of like if they give it to him, it's a powerful political symbol for like it was the sword of the conqueror, but it's also related to this sort of exiled sort of rebel house that, I mean, I don't know how people feel about House Blackfyre now in Westeros because it's sort of like faded into obscurity basically.
Yeah, I don't think
Yeah.
he could ever reveal that. Oh, maybe he could. I guess if he married Daenerys, it might legitimize the Blackfyres. I don't know, but I doubt Illyrio would ever reveal it. And I guess under that theory, the Golden Company could never know because it would too easily get out amongst all the soldiers that he wasn't necessarily a Targaryen. And even Varys seems to think he's a Targaryen because when he's talking to Sir Kevin, he tells him he's a Targaryen, and why would he lie to a dying man? And John Connington obviously seems to believe it. So it might simply be that Illyrio is the only one who knows.
I actually I went and reread that Kevin thing where Illyrio, where Varys is talking to him there, and it was, it's a little more ambiguous though, because what Kevin says is he's dead, and Varys says no, he is here. So he doesn't actually say, he's legitimate. He just says he's here.
Yeah, how could Varys not know about the baby being a Blackfyre? I mean, Varys would have been the one to swap the babies, right? Mm-hmm. And if it was really Aegon that died, and this is a Blackfyre, and this Aegon is a Blackfyre, then Varys would know, right? Because he was the one who switched the babies. Who would have switched the babies?
Or Illyrio
How
pulled
would
another baby switch.
Varys is Illyrio's person in King's Landing, right? How could Illyrio have pulled a move from across the Narrow Sea?
Well, the idea was that because after Varys switches the baby, he sends Aegon across the Narrow Sea to Illyrio, presumably.
Yeah, but
So
would he
that's
have
when-
had the time? Would Illyrio would have had the time to send the baby back and then put his son in his place?
He could just put the son in his place and not send the baby back, and just send that baby somewhere else.
maybe,
in Pentos.
maybe.
Yeah, I guess Varys would have
but
to
it's-
know because he knows everything
This
that
is
happens.
maybe this is maybe a bit of a cheap point, but Varys, when he's talking to Kevin, he's not actually alone. He has his little birds there.
Yeah.
Yeah, he is.
Okay, yeah.
They could hear it. I mean, I've heard this sort of, I think Ashley mentioned it on the podcast Device on Fire, that the little birds have their tongues ripped out, but I don't think I've ever read anything about in the text about that. Do you guys?
No.
Yeah, it's not
Sound
explicitly
familiar?
mentioned anywhere.
Yeah.
And how would they
Oh,
tell
by the
him?
way, Simon Toyne was the leader of the Kingswood Brotherhood, and Terence Toyne was the knight of the Kingsguard who slept with Aegon the Unworthy's mistress. So
I think the Varys thing is what's hanging me up about this. It's hard for me to imagine that Varys is anybody's like tool,
Mm,
Yeah.
and then especially, I mean, I think you'd have to be just stupid to try and make Varys your tool, and especially somebody from across the Narrow Sea who's, working, I guess, would have to have had connected with him at some point.
Another thing, Varys would have known if the baby was Aegon or not, because Aegon was a year old at the time, and probably a year old. And Varys would have seen him many, many times and would have recognized if the other baby had not been Aegon.
And if anyone's going to know about a swapped baby, it's going to be Varys. Like, he would just know what's going
exactly.
on. So it
and
seems
this isn't a newborn baby, right? A newborn baby is relatively easy to switch. But a baby that's even a few months old has distinctive features, and maybe Aegon is in on the whole Blackfyre thing, but he would have to know, where Varys would have to know.
Right.
Well, those distinctive features would have been all over the castle wall after Gregor Clegane came in.
No, I'm talking about if Illyrio swapped the baby with his own.
Well, I mean, would the handlers who took it across the Narrow Sea have known the other Aegon?
No, I'm talking about Varys. Varys would have, eventually seen the baby soon after that.
Oh,
right?
yeah, Varys, yeah.
But,
we know Illyrio comes visiting Varys in King's Landing sometimes, so you would presume the other, the reverse happens too.
Yeah.
I don't know about that though. I feel like Varys. I mean, we know he disappears for a long period of time at the, during dance, but I don't know. I mean, it's possible. I guess we don't have enough information, but he seems to be like present at the council meetings. He seems to be like a regular figure in the court to me.
Yeah, but I mean, he could have been gone at some point, previous to the start of the books. Yeah. After Robert's Rebellion. But yeah, I prefer the version where Varys is in on it, just because he's Varys, he knows things.
Yeah.
Well, what about the theory that
partnership.
Varys is a Blackfyre as well, that he was Sarah's brother? I mean, he gives that shape.
There's no basis for that, though.
Yeah, I thought that was a pretty a popular theory around Westeros at the time.
I know it is very popular. Varys being a Blackfyre.
But yeah, I think it sort of diminishes the sort of thing that he's sort of like risen from the common people and sort of crawled his way up. And, I guess that sort of contradicts with his backstory, that being in a group of mummers. I mean, I don't know. How do you guys imagine that Sarah was sort of kept? I mean, was she like a flavor of the month thing at like a court like Zalabar Zoo or something like that?
That whole thing is really weird. I don't know. Like, I know the whole thing is like, oh, he loves her so much, but like keeping her hands in his room,
Yeah, that is extra creepy.
Yeah, exactly. It's creepy. It's not loving and cute. It's and gross.
Maybe he's keeping them for DNA tests later. If somebody does.
Gonna clone her hands.
But I didn't really. The first time I read that, I was like, wait, so he just had her hands cut off, like plain old whatever. Then I'm like, wait, but maybe they're like stone because she died of grayscale, right?
She did?
That's what I thought. I don't know. The whole thing is so weird. I guess that's another it's hard for me to be like, oh yeah, Varys is doing this out of love, even though he clearly has a connection with the kid. That's indisputable, but
yeah,
I don't know if
well, creepy love is still love, right?
If Game of Thrones, if Song of Ice and Fire has taught us anything, it's that.
So, what do you guys think was the reason behind Illyrio and Varys' decision to send off Dany and Viserys into the Great Grass Sea? Just seemed like they kind of they'd picked Aegon as their man and just sent off these two other Targaryens who seemed to have far more legitimacy than recognized legitimacy than Aegon into this Great Grass Sea to die.
I think he wanted to get rid of them so they wouldn't be, sort of in Aegon's way, and
right.
The wrong way of getting rid of them. I mean, I understand, I guess, why they kept them alive, because they are Mr. and Mr. Contingency Plan, but I if they really didn't want them competing with Aegon, then I mean, just not the right way to do that. And especially if they were planning on, Aegon keeps saying that his hand is being saved for Dany, right? Mm-hmm. But then they married her to Khal Drogo, and that's not a marriage that's going to be dissolved very easily if Drogo's still alive.
I think it's very possible that this plan for Aegon to marry Daenerys has only existed as long as Daenerys' dragons have existed.
Yeah, I think Dany was completely out of the blue. I think that she was only ever used as a marriage piece to wed the Dothraki to the Golden Company. No one suspected her to birth 3 dragons and conquer Slaver's Bay. That was completely out of nowhere. So they're just scrambling to keep up with her, I think.
Yeah, I think they probably thought that Viserys had to sort of they'd flip the coin and it came up like mad. And Dany wasn't really a fact. She was just a little girl sort of following Viserys around. And they also sort of presented a smoke screen for Robert to go sort of a target for him to go after and sort of throw off the scent for Aegon.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, we talked about that. Me and Sylvana talked about that on the the Flight of Sorrow episode, and it was the fact that they deliberately kept the Dany and Viserys as the beggar king and queen, so that Robert would deliberately not be afraid of them, and all of his attention would be on them, and it would be so clear to the rest of the world that House Targaryen had fallen into nothing, and that would distract them from the real threat, which is Aegon, whom they're grooming to be the next king. So it's like a walking billboard to House Targaryen's fall.
But
apparently,
the plan was not did they intend to use the Dothraki at all? Like, I
reckon he actually meant, because if you remember, Varys actually sends an assassin to kill Daenerys, and that plan should have gone through if it wasn't for Jorah interrupting. So I reckon Varys always meant for Dany to wear the Dothraki and then have her assassinated, and that may have been enough to provoke Khal Drogo's Khalasar to cross the Narrow Sea and attack King Robert and the Seven Kingdoms, and I guess Illyrio and Varys would just provide the ships.
So Dany doesn't even know how screwed over she's been.
Yeah. Well, as I said, Dany was just a pawn. Like, no one suspected her to become the Queen of Slaver's Bay.
You know, it would be hilarious if the dragon eggs were, like, if Illyrio didn't even think they were dragon eggs. He just, like, bought them from, like, a pawn shop or something. What?
They were rocks.
But they were catching dragons.
Yeah, that would be a great detail.
Yeah. He must have been wishing he had kept them for Aegon.
Yeah. No, that's a huge thing because, I mean, Targaryen with dragons or Targaryen without dragons, that's like, you know, we talked about this in The Princess and the Queen. I mean, like, the legitimacy is with the dragons.
Of course. But again, no one suspects dragons are going to be hatched. They've been extinct for like 150 years or something.
Right. But that's what I'm confused about now, though, because you would think, like, once they hear that Dany has dragons, and they must, do they just not believe it?
No, they believe it, I think.
So how are they? I mean, you know what? They just must still be underestimating Dany.
Well, that's why they want Aegon to marry Dany.
That was the plan, to get Aegon to marry Dany. Yeah, they want that.
Yeah, marry Dany and take a dragon.
Still being like, oh yeah, we'll just marry her to Aegon, and it's like, guys.
Again, they're still treating her like a pawn when she is so much more powerful than they are, at least in physical force.
She's Queen of Marine. Like, did you miss this?
Yeah, I know they're underestimating her.
Yeah, they just don't have super good intelligence because, like, in the Tyrion chapter from early in Dance that I just read for that, like, Illyrio's constantly telling Tyrion, like, oh, she's probably halfway to Mantares by now and stuff like that. Like, they don't Illyrio at that point is completely has no idea that she's sort of settled down to try to sort of bring Marine into peace and prosperity.
I don't know if that makes them stupid, though. I think everyone is suspecting Daenerys to make her way back to Westeros, but yeah, it's kind of...
Yeah, I'm just saying they don't have very good information about what Daenerys is up to or what she's like.
Yeah. Oh, I thought you meant intelligence in terms of their strategies, but yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the things I really like, and that Martin often, sort of preserves is not everybody knows exactly what's going on in the rest of the story.
Absolutely, even the chess masters.
It's always a fun little detail.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't exactly have telephones and internet. Right?
No.
News travels slowly and it's distorted.
Carrier ravens.
Yeah.
That's their
No, but are there ravens? Are there ravens on Essos?
Nah, ravens are too cool for Essos.
Maybe Taurus.
You never hear about it, so.
Yeah.
You know what? It's
And usually the news brought over by sailors and stuff is usually pretty distorted, right? So you can't really believe in all of it.
Yeah, the ravens, they're based on the magic of the children, so only be in Westeros. I
Are
guess.
they?
Are they?
Yeah.
Well, they originally the ravens we get this in
Yeah,
brands.
they used to talk.
I thought
Yeah,
the
you talk
maesters were.
No, they actually they used to actually speak the messages. I guess that they always had somebody controlling them back then or something. But
Cool.
after they sort of atrophied and they also sort of declined and the magic went away, so they just carry messages now.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of that part in Harry Potter when Sirius sends Harry like a letter with tropical birds.
An exotic bird.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose they could be like sort of more mundane, like carrier birds in Essos, like how we in the real world do. But I guess that might be too close, sort of thematically, to the ravens that he wouldn't do that.
And Essos is so
Well,
huge.
Well, if they've got those Valerian roads too, if you had like a Pony Express style thing on a, riding down a Valerian road, you could probably go just as fast as a raven.
That's true.
Yeah, and there's
Switching out the horses, fairly quickly.
yeah, and there's a ton of trade between the three cities, so I guess they pass the messages with caravans also.
All right. So, are we almost concluded with our?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I think I got to get going here.
Awesome. All right. I should eat dinner at 11. Awesome. So you know what? As a final coda to our episode, let's all go around and give our opinion on R plus L equals J. So I'm gonna say yes.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
undisputable. Out of all the crackpot theories, that's the one that's undisputable. Indisputable,
that is-
rather.
Not even really qualifies as crackpot anymore.
Okay.
And I love how that's kind of like the root that grows all of this other crazy speculation.
It's true. It's true. Someone
Yeah.
mentioned that. All right. Awesome. So thank you so much for listening, everyone. And listen. How do we end these things? Listen to us next time.
No
in
one knows how to end these.
It'll be something totally random, but it might interest you. So listen to VOK because we're awesome.
Flawless.
I feel like we should have a cheer like VVOK, VVOK. I don't know, whatever. I get a little too creative with these things. But anyway,
Awesome.
all right. So I'm gonna turn off the recorder now. But cool.
Well, thanks for organizing it, Mikkel.
No problem.
That was great.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks very much for having me, guys.
I'm so
Yeah, you were
happy.
great. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Dan.
Thanks for finally finding me on Skype.
No problem. Yeah, so we actually had a very geographically diverse podcast. I like that.
Yeah. I think we've got like 3 podcasts recording this one. I've got another one in like 4 hours.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh my
it's
gosh.
crazy. And I think the Lord
What
of the Rings one is being recorded this weekend as well. And maybe
Yeah,
Sherlock Holmes. I don't know. Yeah, it's like 5 podcasts in one weekend. It's crazy.
Yeah, I think Sherlock we're actually waiting until actually I say we. I'm not sure if I'm gonna be on that, but they're
Okay.
waiting until February.
Sure.
All right, I'm gonna go get something to eat.
Okay.
To talk to you
Okay.
guys.
Thanks, guys.
Stay
See you
warm.
later.
Forever.
Take care, everybody.
All right,
Bye, guys. See
Bye.
ya.